Sol Ji-hoo came back.
The position of Valhalla's representative, which had been empty for 8 months, was filled once again. This news was immediately delivered to all members, including those working outside the building. As a result, Sol Ji-hoo was quickly surrounded by his comrades, who came running from downstairs after hearing the news.
"He's back! Sol is back!"
Hugo picked Sol Ji-hoo up and rejoiced like a kid.
Tilda, look at your shoulder and back muscles. Did you go and get steroids for 8 months? Cho-hong expressed her awe while constantly rubbing and fondling Sol Ji-hoo's wide, hard back. "Welcome back, representative." Marcel Guionia greeted him with his usual monotonous voice.
"Oppa Tilda, sorry to ask you when you just got here, but can you lend me some money?"
"It's kind of urgent." Maria put her hands out while asking in a nasal voice. "Come UNNN.
If you came back, you should have gone around and said something."
"It's not like you've been gone a month or 2. It's been 8 whole months."
Phi Sora was still complaining. The quiet building quickly became noisy.
Sol Ji-hoo quietly smiled inside all the ruckus and looked around. He had been longing for this scenery for 7 years.
The loneliness he felt after Black Sol Ji-hoo left seemed to subside slightly. "Where have you been? Did you get stronger? Do you have any money on you?" Sol Ji-hoo answered the never-ending questions one by one. "How can you say, 'Have you eaten?' so nonchalantly? Shouldn't it be, 'Have you been well?'"
I almost got fooled. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes met the grumbling Phi Sora's. He suddenly put down his silverware and winked at her.
Phi Sora stopped talking with a flustered expression. Jang Maldong, who was standing back and watching the warm reunion with a smile, cleared his throat after seeing Sol Ji-hoo eyeing him.
"What are y'all doing so early in the morning?"
"Huh? Can't you see?
Sol's back,
so we're saying hi."
"Isn't that obvious?" "Well, keep it to a minimum. Can't you see that you forced him to put his silverware down? Even a dog wouldn't bother someone who's eating."
"We're just curious."
"Aren't you curious too, old man?"
"Don't talk back to me."
"You can say your hellos later. Can't you see that he's eating after coming back early in the morning? Look at the shadows under his eyes. Throw him a warm welcoming party in the evening and let him be for now."
"Aw, now that you mention it, he does seem a little tired."
Cho-hong was quickly convinced by Jang Maldong. "Right, and welcoming parties need alcohol."
"Sol, you better come tonight."
"Hugo, Maria, follow me." "Yees. Tonight, we drink, till we die." "Sure, Tilda."
As Cho-hong began to rush downstairs, Hugo followed after her jubilantly.
Maria responded in a lukewarm manner and went after them as well. The trio, who couldn't live without alcohol, left. It's not even noon.
Just how much are they planning to buy? Sol Ji-hoo smiled bitterly. With the 3 loudest members leaving, the cafeteria quickly regained its serenity.
Only Jang Maldong and Phi Sora were left talking to him. "Thank you. I didn't mind it all that much, but I guess it was a little uncomfortable because it's been a while."
Sol Ji-hoo said with a smile. "I don't blame you.
I see them every day and I'm still not used to it."
Jang Maldong also laughed.
"So."
While a warm atmosphere flowed between the master and the disciple, Phi Sora spoke indifferently. "Why did you wink at me?"
"You better not ask me out on a date,
saying we haven't met in a while." Phi Sora put down her foot, having suffered from Sol Ji-hoo's manipulations multiple times already.
Sol Ji-hoo looked around at the few members that were still in the cafeteria, eating, and then spoke.
"Should we move to a quieter place?"
The 3 of them then left the cafeteria and moved to Team 1's office. "I heard that you introduced Sol Ah to the Federation." Sol Ji-hoo brought up the matter that he was curious about the most.
"Ah, you mean Yishino Solara?"
"Who?" "Yep. I asked Mr. Marcel Guionia to help her form a contract with a spirit." Phi Sora giggled.
"But don't misunderstand.
I didn't help her because I like her or anything.
There was your request, and I also just thought it was a waste of valuable talent.
Sol Jihu gave Phi Sora an odd look as she acted like a typical tsundere.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Nothing. So, are Sung-jin and Sol-ah back yet?
Yi Sung-jin is in the middle of an expedition, and Yishino Solara came back a week ago. Why are you mixing Sol-ah's name with Miss Hoshino Urara? You'll know once you see her.
It's kind of hard to believe. I wonder just what she learned in the Federation to have become like that.
Though, it's much better than the victim cosplay she used to do before.
Phi Sora smacked her lips.
The way Sol Jihu understood it, it sounded like Yi Sol-ah was Hoshino Urara Fide. For such a kind, soft-spoken girl to become a madwoman. It was indeed hard to believe.
Well, it looks like she had some gains. Phi Sora continued. I guess you can say she's finally like an archer now. She seemed pretty skilled at handling her spirit, and she also rose to level 4. She might even become a high ranker soon.
A high ranker? Really?
To be more precise, I heard she was given a free pass for the high ranker examination.
Her spending more than half a year in the Harem mountain range counted as a valuable contribution apparently.
Sol Jihu unknowingly exclaimed. Although he had never been to the Harem mountain range, he knew it was a dangerous place where scuffles against the parasites were common. She must have constantly fought the parasites while working as a scout in that region, so her receiving a free pass wasn't so hard to accept.
I could tell she went through a lot while she was there. Anyway, it sounded like she had enough contribution points and only needed more experience points.
Phi Sora trailed off in the middle of her explanation. Sol Jihu and Phi Sora simultaneously turned toward the door. Speaking of the devil, the closed door opened with a clunk. Next, an unusual storm charged into the room.
Oh, Ra, Bio, Neem.
Sol Jihu's eyes widened. He could see a teenage girl, who received the news late, running toward him. No, she was floating above the ground, stirring up winds by kicking the air and quite literally flying at him. Didn't I tell you to stop using your spirit inside the building? Phi Sora shouted. Yi Sol-ah rushed into the room, ignoring Phi Sora completely, and then came to a sudden stop. Dancing in the air, she looked down at Sol Jihu. He's the real one. Wish. She shot down in an instant and hugged him. Sol Jihu flinched. Her past long black hair was nowhere to be found, and he saw short hair that only half covered her neck. I'm not kidding, Aura. Yi Sol-ah shouted into the empty air. This is him. This is my Orabeo Nim. Representative Sol. However, Sol Jihu could clearly sense a foreign mass of energy in the air. It twisted its body bashfully and stealthily hid behind Yi Sol-ah. Though it acted cute and childlike, it gave off a rather powerful energy. Though Sol Jihu did not stay inside the spirit realm for long, he had not come across such a powerful spirit other than the Spirit Kings. What do you mean you're embarrassed? You've been wanting to see him since forever, asking me when he's coming back every day. Huh? You want me to be quiet because you're embarrassed? You need time to compose yourself? You want to start by writing a letter? Am I crazy? I should shut up. Yi Sol-ah advertised Aura's words to the whole world in a rich, fruity voice. Sol Jihu chuckled before suddenly furrowing brows. Sol-ah? Okay. I'm sorry. Don't say you're gonna pack up and leave. Huh? Yi Sol-ah quickly turned to Sol Jihu, who was pointing at the girl's face. You're… Oh, this? Yi Sol-ah rubbed the back end of her hair and smiled cheerfully. I cut it short because it was getting in the way in fights. What do you think? This suits me too, right? It did suit her. It highlighted her cheerful, sweet smile well. The way it gave the impression of liveliness, she seemed like a pretty boy as well. But the problem wasn't with her hairstyle. Your eye. There was a long scar cutting across her left eye. Ah! Quickly falling silent, Yi Sol Ah gently rubbed her left eye and then smiled. Well, it was the price of lowering my guard. Who?
When it rains, this scar stings a bit. Don't start that again. Thai Sora cut in, unable to stand watching her give the same cringy speech.
Yi Sol Ah giggled.
It's really nothing though.
I got it while I was fighting an evil phantom.
Sol Jihu doubted his ears. Evil phantom? You fought an evil phantom?
Yep. Tang. A gunshot sound suddenly rang out, and then my eyes started burning.
Thankfully, the first shot missed because of aura. And then Tai 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 Uni came to save me right away. This, Tai 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 Uni, seemed to be the fairy general, Tai He Ingraria. But Sol Jihu decided to gloss over that for now. Shouldn't you get it treated? Scars get harder to erase the longer they stay with you. I know, but I want to keep it. Why? To be honest, it hasn't been that long since I got this scar.
Was it a week before I came back? It was when I was feeling confident and content with my strength. Yi Sol Ah smiled bitterly. I was too excited that I was playing around and got hurt when I could have avoided it. I thought about getting rid of it, but then I remember that incident every time I look at the mirror and think, the parasites really aren't easy to deal with. I shouldn't have fooled around like that back then. So it seemed Yi Sol Ah wanted to keep the scar as a reminder not to make the same mistake. Sol Jihu nodded his head in approval.
Since this was what she herself wished for, he didn't see the need to force her or convince her otherwise.
But this scar actually has its good point.
Yi Sol Ah bent her knees slightly and then hopped up. Using the air as a chair, she lifted her right leg and slowly crossed it over her left thigh. She lowered her head in a 45-degree angle, crossed her arms, and then gave a seductive wink. What do you think? Isn't it kind of sensual?
Like it feels dangerous, but in an alluring, provocative way. Oh God, Thai Sora's sigh rang out. Kook. A laughter escaped Sol Jihu's mouth. He clenched his teeth and nodded his head. Right, it was sexy.
But it was an adorable, lovable sexiness. Hey, can't you see that we're talking?
Thai Sora spoke in an annoyed tone. Come on. I haven't seen him in ages. I want to talk to him more. Do it later.
An ordinary member shouldn't be barging into the office when the representative is talking with the advisor and a team leader.
Meh. You bully.
What was that?
Okay, fine. I'll leave.
The self-proclaimed, sexy Sol Ah pouted.
She floated back down and then slammed something down on the desk. Eat this.
What's this? A fruit?
Thai Sora raised her eyebrow after rummaging through the bag she placed on the desk. It was filled with her favorite fruit from paradise. I bought some on my way back from my morning jog. Shouldn't high-ranking people have some refreshments while they talk?
How can you be so thoughtless?
Are you hearing yourself right now?
Why would you buy this? Don't misunderstand. I didn't buy them to give them to you.
They just caught my attention.
Seeing this exchange, Sol Jihu and Zhang Maldong laughed quietly. The way she was chattering with an indifferent expression, it was obvious who she was imitating. Wah. Thai Sora seemed to be at a loss for words because of it. Yi Sol Ah turned her head with a hmph and then clapped her hands after seeing Sol Jihu.
Orabeo Nim. Let's have a race later. Sure. Are you confident? Hoo-hoo. I'll show you the true power of sexy provocative Sol Ah. The loser has to grant 5,000 wishes to the winner. Bang! Yi Sol Ah shot Sol Jihu with a finger gun before winking at him and flying out of the room. The storm left just as quickly as it rushed in. Do you see why I call her Yishino Solara? Thai Sora gritted her teeth as soon as the door closed behind her. Sol Jihu had no choice but to agree. Bubbly like a sparkling soda. That would be how Sol Jihu would describe the current Yi Sol Ah. Though she was a little too bubbly, it was far better than being flat. Anyway, you winked at me just to ask about Sol and Sungjin?
That wasn't the case. While that was one of the things Sol Jihu wanted to check up on, his real goal was something else.
I have a favor to ask.
Now that his curiosity had been satisfied, Sol Jihu cut to the chase.
Can you spar with me one more time? Phi Sora paused while shuffling through the fruits. She then raised her eyes as she slowly picked out a fruit. The first thing you want to do after coming back from your training is to show off your strength? Why, are you confident in winning now? I'm not trying to get revenge or anything. Sol Jihu shook his head. I want the same condition as before. Fighting without using mana. Phi Sora furrowed her brows. Zhang Maldong let out a surprised grunt as well. This made his favor rather intriguing. No one knew exactly where Sol Jihu had been for the past 8 months. Even how long he had been there and what exactly he had been doing were a mystery. The only person who had an idea was Baek Haiju. Kim Hana and the others only knew that Sol Jihu had gone to use the divine stigmata. Zhang Maldong was worried as he didn't know anything about the divine stigmata. Because the current Phi Sora was several times stronger than the past. Time was fair to everyone. Phi Sora did not just sit around during the 8 months that Sol Jihu was gone. She spent the majority of the time training in Mount Palayam's volcanic region, and Zhang Maldong had also guided her with all his heart. The result of her hard work was revealed not long ago. As such, Zhang Maldong judged Phi Sora to be the strongest member among Valhalla's official members. She was far out of Chung Chohong's reach, and there was a chance that she would not lose to Hoshino Urara either. He didn't know how much Sol Jihu improved during this time, but he did not think Phi Sora would lose in a battle of technique that left out the use of mana. Did you make some gains? Grandpa, wait. Just as Zhang Maldong carefully asked, Phi Sora raised her hand and asked. Why me? Because Miss Phi Sora is the only one. Why not Chohong or Hoshino Urara? They won't do. I wanted to ask Miss Baek Haiju, but she's not around. That's why I'm asking you. Because Miss Baek Haiju isn't here. Huh. Phi Sora let out a chuckle. Did he say that knowing what position Baek Haiju held within paradise? You know you sound really arrogant right now. While I was cultivating. Feeling that more explanation was in order, Sol Jihu said. I thought about you from time to time. Me? Why? Phi Sora blinked with a somewhat uneasy look. Because the more I thought about it, the more amazing you seemed. Quote. Didn't you reach an independent realm without anyone's help? Well, yes, if you're talking about one with a sword. It's not something you can learn by having someone teach it to you. Right, and you achieved that on your own. This time, I learned just how amazing that really is. I even got a newfound respect for you. That's why I want to fight you one more time. Sol Jihu carried himself with gravitas while sounding completely serious. He didn't seem to be joking at all. From Phi Sora's perspective, the hero of paradise was directly expressing his respect for her as a martial artist. Well, if you put it that way. Though I might be a little dumb, I guess I am pretty talented with swords. She sounded calm and unfazed, but her nose was already reaching the height of Eiffel Tower. But she wasn't necessarily wrong. Phi Sora's aptitude was brilliant and passionate. These two traits were specialized for battle and swordsmanship. Alright, I guess it's okay. I've been wanting to test my techniques, which have been optimized for level 6, anyways. I'm also curious how strong you've gotten. Phi Sora fiddled with the fruit excitedly. Then, oh yeah. She gave a sharp look. You know I don't go easy, right? Sol Jihu nodded silently. He then spoke with a light bow. Please take care of me. Okay. Phi Sora got up and then brought the fruit to her mouth. Crunch. After taking a bite, she puffed out her cheeks and pointed to the door. Let's go. 1. He specifically uses the word cultivating rather than training. Sol Ji-hoo and Phi Sora moved 10 steps away from each other and took out their respective weapons.
They stood in a vacant lot behind the Valhalla building, where people rarely visited. They chose this place on purpose because they didn't want to attract other members' attention. Jang Maldong stood away from the two before suddenly dropping his gaze down to his feet. Next to him, a tiny yellow fuzzball was staring at Sol Ji-hoo and Phi Sora.
He seemed to have found his way here on his own.
Jang Maldong opened his mouth to ask him how he found out about the duel, but in the end, he just turned his eyes back to the lot. There were 2 reasons. The first was that, with his tiny wings folded over his chest, the chick didn't seem to want to be disturbed.
The second was that Jang Maldong sensed Phi Sora's movement. Phi Sora stared at Sol Ji-hoo and slowly stretched out her right arm.
The tip of her sword pointed at her opponent. Sol Ji-hoo stood motionless. His spear hung horizontally in a relaxed grip as he faced Phi Sora's fierce gaze with unwavering eyes. A moment later, as Phi Sora bent her knees, Sol Ji-hoo's body turned slightly to the right.
The war of nerves continued unabated when suddenly, "Ha!"
With a sharp cry, Phi Sora sprang through the air.
She ran and then kicked the ground with all her might.
As she soared into the air, Phi Sora raised her right arm above her head, then swung it forward with brute force towards Sol Ji-hoo.
Clang! Sol Ji-hoo lifted his spear.
He parried Phi Sora's sword, but it quickly found its way back to his chin.
The blade scraped across Sol Ji-hoo's face. Phi Sora was persistent. She changed the direction of her sword again and Sol Ji-hoo hurriedly plunged his spear down. In response, Phi Sora gracefully pulled her sword back and thrust it forward once more.
It was then.
Tang!
A sudden, intense pain jolted through her right hand.
Sol Ji-hoo had spun his spear in a semicircle and struck the back of her sword. The clash was so strong that she almost dropped her sword. Phi Sora managed to straighten her posture and tried again to stab her opponent. However, Yu-uk!
By then, the blunt end of Sol Ji-hoo's spear had already hit her stomach. This threw Phi Sora off her balance, and she stumbled backward a few steps before falling to the ground. As she placed her hand on her stomach, the expression on her face was that of astonishment.
What the?
His speed and strength are just.
They were incomparable to the past. If this was real combat, she'd be dead by now. Phi Sora glanced upwards. Sol Ji-hoo was quietly looking down at her. Her eyes shot wide open. That was.
But instead of finishing her sentence, she was forced to stand back up. This time, Sol Ji-hoo dashed at Phi Sora.
He lifted his spear above his head and swung it down at his opponent.
As soon as she got up, Phi Sora moved her sword diagonally to block the spear approaching her left shin. This caused her upper body to twist unnaturally, and not missing his chance, Sol Ji-hoo quickly thrust his spear into Phi Sora's left side.
Phi Sora clenched her teeth.
Had the opponent's attack come from the right or at least from the front, she could have deflected it by swinging her sword as hard as she could. But in this position, the position she was forced to maintain by her opponent, evading an attack was nearly impossible.
Sol Ji-hoo seemed intent on beating her up by keeping her off balance.
When she raised her sword to block the attack, as she was given no other choice, Sol Ji-hoo's spear swished gracefully in front of her face.
Phi Sora was forced to take a step back. She told herself she'd use this chance to collect herself, but she knew as soon as she stepped back that her opponent had gained the upper hand on her. To make matters worse, Sol Ji-hoo began thrusting his spear left and right, as if not to give Phi Sora a chance to think. Phi Sora pulled herself back, swinging her body from side to side.
SSSSHK.
Like a shooting star, the blade slashed the air in front of her face.
Phi Sora turned her head in a hurry, but her eyes remained fixed on Sol Ji-hoo and his spear.
One chance. Just one chance would be enough.
Right now, he was throwing her off with consecutive attacks, but his movements were likely to get bigger as he prepared the final blow.
It would be her chance to strike. It was then that Sol Ji-hoo spun around with his back to her. This was the big motion Phi Sora had been waiting for. She raised her longsword intuitively, but panicked. Sol Ji-hoo's reaction was astonishingly fast. Before Phi Sora could do anything, her opponent turned his body and thrust his spear at her like a lightning bolt. She managed to deflect it with her sword, but he swung his spear again almost immediately as if everything were part of a pre-arranged choreography. The swiftness of his attack shocked her. Phi Sora's strength, endurance, and stamina were top class, but her agility still remained at intermediate, low. On the other hand, Sol Ji-hoo's agility was high, low.
Their agilities differed by 3 steps, so it was only natural that she struggled to keep up with him.
Cha-cha-cha-chong.
Loud, metallic clanging sounds rang out consecutively. It took all of Phi Sora's effort just to block her opponent's attacks.
Suddenly she stopped. Damn it!
She knew that at this rate it was only a matter of time before the spear broke through her defense.
She had to find a way to turn the tide of battle amidst the clashing of the blades. Clang, clang. Her arms shook violently with each clash and she frowned. She pushed the spear away from her left shoulder and took a chance. She tilted her longsword and thrust it half a beat faster towards the right. Swish! Phi Sora felt the spear slide past the back of her sword and smiled crookedly. She had him attack her twice in the left direction and then launched a surprise attack in the opposite direction. The attack was the result of a careful analysis of Sol Ji-hoo's movement patterns.
As the spear slipped past her sword, Phi Sora swung her arms wide and brandished the sword from top to bottom.
The spear spun in midair before lodging into the ground. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes flinched a little and Phi Sora grinned. When she held the spear in place with one hand and plunged towards Sol Ji-hoo, he quickly pulled the spear back and turned his body. Ha! Phi Sora almost burst into laughter. Turning and twisting the body was often an unnecessary movement during combat. She could always just let go of the spear, and she felt confident that she could reach Sol Ji-hoo before he could reach her. Phi Sora moved closer, certain of her victory. However, Kuuk! Suddenly she felt a sharp pain in her pelvis. Because she was moving very fast, her waist bent almost in half. The pain caused Phi Sora to stop in her tracks, and when her head drooped down she saw the blunt end of the spear buried deep in her pelvis. Sol Ji-hoo had thrust his spear backward with his back towards her. More than half of Phi Sora's predictions hadn't come true. It was true that Sol Ji-hoo turned around, but he stopped halfway. At the same time, he had held his spear backward and pushed it towards her. He only used the blunt end because they were sparring. If this had been real combat, he would not have hesitated to use the head. And if he had done so, she would have died even before she had a chance to move closer. She could have avoided this attack if she had been more careful. But this was the first gap in his defense she had discovered since their sparring began, and she just couldn't be patient enough. Ultimately, her impatience had become the cause of her defeat. No way. Phi Sora's lips trembled. The fact was that she had already been struck twice. It wasn't that she couldn't admit it, she just couldn't help but doubt that her opponent was playing her. She felt completely helpless. A moment later Sol Ji-hoo turned around and waved his spear fiercely. With a cry of rage, Phi Sora blocked the spear with her longsword, but she couldn't manage to block his kicks. Pook! When the third kick landed on her stomach, Phi Sora finally dropped her sword and fell backward. Only then did Sol Ji-hoo stop, relaxing his grip on his spear. A strange silence descended upon the vacant lot. But it didn't last long. As Sol Ji-hoo opened his mouth to speak to Phi Sora, who sat on the ground dazed, he suddenly backed away with a flinch. Less than a second later, a series of daggers struck where he had just stood. Yo 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 tilde. He knew who she was just by her voice. Hoshino Urara jumped from the terrace of the dormitory floor and landed on her feet.
You're finally here.
You traitor.
With her back to the building, she pointed her finger at Sol Jihu.
Sol Jihu tilted his head curiously.
Traitor? Did you forget about our contract?
Fun is the only reason I'm here.
From the day we signed the contract, as my employer, you're obliged to provide me with entertainment. How could you forget our promise for 240,000 years?
Come on, it was just 8 months. I'm trying to tell you every day was like 1,000 years to me.
Hoshino Urara shouted, gritting her teeth.
Sol Jihu glanced down at the daggers on the ground.
Despite her crazy attitude, her attack was full of a clear intent to kill.
It was then that Hoshino Urara reached inside her clothes and threw something at him. 4 daggers flew directly towards Sol Jihu, all at the same time.
Oh ho ho ho! Death is what a traitor deserves.
I'll have you pay for deceiving me.
Papa Popek.
Hoshino Urara suddenly began blinking rapidly.
The reason was that the 4 daggers had turned midair and returned to her.
Hoshino
Urara's eyes moved slowly. 1 dagger was above her head, the other 2 were under her armpits, and the last dagger was between her legs.
She could still feel the daggers vibrating against the wall. At the same time, she felt an enormous aura in front of her. Slowly, Sol Jihu's hair was rising upwards.
Her interruption was unexpected, but he always welcomed a good sparring partner. Hoshino Urara was a unique rancor.
There was no doubt she would be a suitable partner. Sol Jihu only was raising his mana because his opponent seemed to have done so.
Hoshino Urara's blinking grew more rapid.
The same was true for Phi Sora.
Her jaw slowly dropped as she looked up at Sol Jihu. His body seemed almost fused with mana and was now boiling as one big lump of energy.
Hey! Good. This is what I expect from my employer.
Hoshino Urara muttered gallantly and grabbed a dagger with each of her hands. And then she bowed her head down.
I apologize. She even knelt down before Sol Jihu. I won't do it again. Please forgive me. She stabbed the ground with her daggers and threw herself on the ground, her forehead touching the dirt. Sol Jihu looked disappointed. He was just getting into the game. This person, she was as spontaneous as ever. Go.
You're really letting me go? This will be the last time. The next time you bother me, I'm really going to get mad.
Thank you.
I'll be a good girl now.
Hoshino Urara crawled away in the kneeling position. Her cockroach-like movements amazed Sol Jihu. He watched her move away before turning his eyes back to Phi Sora. She was still on the ground.
Miss Phi Sora.
Number. Her voice was small and feeble. Phi Sora bit her lower lip. I want to stop.
She was stabbed 3 times in the same spot. It was a crushing defeat with no room for any excuses. And after witnessing Sol Jihu's mana a moment ago, she completely lost the will to fight. Phi Sora slowly got up, using her longsword as a cane.
Sol Jihu noticed she was disheartened by the defeat and tried to approach her, but she stopped him. It's okay. Now, everything seems clear. Phi Sora's face darkened. She herself was unsure what she wanted to say. She gave a small sigh and her shoulders slumped. I'll get going now. Slowly, she left the vacant lot and went back inside the building. Was I too harsh? Sol Jihu licked his lips as he leaned his spear against his shoulder.
But based on what he knew about Phi Sora, he decided that she would have been angrier with him if he had gone easy on her. It was best to do his best.
Sol Jihu concluded and turned his eyes.
He noticed that little Chick was looking up at him sternly from a short distance away.
He also saw Zhang Maldong. The old man's eyes were wavering slightly.
What happened to you? Zhang Maldong barely managed to ask. He stood with a look of disbelief across his face.
His reaction was understandable. Sol Jihu completely crushed Phi Sora.
His technical skills as well as his physical capabilities greatly surpassed those of Phi Sora. Pressing Phi Sora, who controlled the sword as if it were part of her body, to move according to his will. Impossible.
Unless. There was only one possible explanation. Sol Jihu had reached a greater realm than Phi Sora.
One thing Zhang Maldong had noticed about the way Sol Jihu moved was that not only was he controlling the spear as if it were part of his body, but his determination and his weapon seemed almost united. Zhang Maldong looked at him wide-eyed for an explanation, and Sol Jihu slowly said,
"It's a very long story."
"Is that all right?"
Asterisk.
They moved to a different area and Sol Jihu explained to Zhang Maldong about what had happened.
Of course, he was careful to leave out certain things, about 9 eyes and Black Sol Jihu's true identity, for example.
The explanation took a long time because Zhang Maldong was eager to learn all the details.
But it still would have taken a long time if he hadn't.
The story was worth 7 years after all.
Unbelievable.
Zhang Maldong couldn't hide his amazement.
"It's unbelievable, really,"
he exclaimed and shook his head. He was proud of Sol Jihu for facing the trials head-on and awed by the mysterious helper that Gyula had sent.
On the other hand, he was pissed.
Zhang Maldong himself had always been distressed by the fact that Sol Jihu's insight had been too average to rise to the level of a realm.
And he agreed that hands-on learning was the key. There was only so much a person could learn by simply listening to a lecture. Even so, Sol Jihu had been pushed too far.
Zhang Maldong was shocked to learn that the training had caused Sol Jihu to fall into a state of senselessness.
Sol Jihu could have collapsed mentally in the process, and it was this fact that angered Zhang Maldong. He was just glad that Sol Jihu's efforts were well compensated in the form of perfect harmony. "You did well. It must have been hard. I want to tell you that I'm okay, but I can't. I can't deny that it was hard." Sol Jihu murmured and smiled bitterly.
"That's understandable."
Zhang Maldong gave a bitter smile as well.
It was then that they heard a voice calling them.
Chohong was yelling at them, "Wrap it up and let's begin the welcome party." Quite some time had passed while they were talking and the evening sun was setting. "Let's go." There was nothing more left to say. Zhang Maldong slowly got up from his seat. "Ha ha. I can't believe it.
7 years you say? 7 years."
He patted Sol Jihu on the shoulder and turned around.
At the same time, he heaved a heavy sigh.
He finally understood how Sol Jihu became a completely different person in just 8 months.
The change was the result of 7 years of rigorous, restless training.
The result is really impressive, beyond comparison. He's just one step away from achieving Trinity Harmony. Now I'm curious about that helper."
Zhang Maldong nodded as he walked down the stairs.
Then suddenly, he stopped and turned around. "Well, don't you think you were too harsh on her? You've been training for 7 years,
but she's only trained for a few months."
"But she used to be better than me. There was the possibility that her 8 months were worth more than my 7 years. So you didn't let your guard down."
"I suppose you're right."
"She left without complaint because she knew you'd taken her seriously. She'd be upset if you'd been easy on her."
"That's why I tried my best." "Do you think that was the right choice?" Zhang Maldong thought for a second and let out a sigh.
"I don't know. She looks tough, but underneath she's very soft-hearted." Asterisk.
That evening, Valhalla threw a party to celebrate Sol Jihu's return.
"Raise your glasses, everyone." It seemed Zhang Maldong had worried for nothing.
At the party, he found Phi Sora as lively as ever.
She even took on the role of a party starter.
"The first glass goes to our representative, in celebration of his safe return."
"To the representative!" Everyone shouted after Phi Sora. She emptied her first glass of wine and opened a new bottle.
And the second glass goes to our representative, who, after months of rigorous training, is now much stronger than before.
To the representative.
And the third glass also goes to our representative, who just can't seem to control his strength, showing off his new skills like he can't forget the past. To the representative.
Hoshino Urara's voice especially stood out. Sol Jihu glared at Phi Sora,
but she pretended not to notice and emptied her drink.
Her reddened neck showed that she was drunk. Nevertheless, he had fun. Almost all members of Valhalla had gathered for the celebration, and the housebound ghosts delivered food and wine to them under Flone's command. As the night advanced, everyone ate and drank merrily and the echoes of laughter filled the hall. The only problem was that the wine seemed endless. Drink. Drink. Drink, till you drop. This is crazy.
How much wine did they get?
Oh, Rahi muttered in disdain as she watched Chohong pour 2 bottles worth of wine into her mouth. It wasn't until after midnight that the party from hell quieted down.
This was far from saying that the party was dead.
It was only quiet compared to the beginning, and many people were still conscious.
We're out of drinks already? There's more in the kitchen.
I'll go get them. Whoa! I'll leave it to you, team leader Tilda. Chohong slurred loudly and waved the empty bottle in her hand. Phi Sora got up.
I can't anymore.
Sol Jihu also got up from his seat. Liver. I have to save my liver.
Shuffling across the room, he almost stepped on Marcel Guionia, who had passed out on the floor, but managed to make it out in one piece.
I thought I'd die.
Maybe he was hallucinating because he drank too much. He saw Maria collecting empty bottles of wine, muttering to herself, "These should fetch a lot."
Sol Jihu decided to take a walk to sober up. He saw a room with the light on at the end of the dark hallway. He peeked inside and found Un Yuri.
He remembered seeing her at the party earlier that evening.
Un Yuri seemed to have left early to study.
Her pen was moving busily, jotting down complex formulas over the paper.
The light illuminating her room was the product of light magic. She really seemed to have blossomed into a full-blown magician. Un Yuri is a hard worker. You can trust her more. Sol Jihu remembered Black Sol Jihu's words and nodded to himself. Then he tiptoed past her room. The next place Sol Jihu visited was the shrine at the corner of the building. The ghosts that had worked hard all evening were gathered there, eating and drinking with Flone's permission. I forgot they were here. He watched them for a while when suddenly he felt a finger poke him in the back. Flone? Flone was floating behind him. She seemed uneasy and tense as she fidgeted. What's wrong? Well, I went to the kitchen to get more food and wine for the ghosts, and Flone lowered her head without finishing her sentence. Sol Jihu hurried up the stairs. When he reached the 10th floor, he heard a muffled cry. The cry from the kitchen, where the lights were off, created a spooky atmosphere. Perhaps Flone had scolded one of the ghosts too harshly. Sol Jihu thought as he peered into the kitchen. However, Hick! He immediately sobered up. The crimson hair strikingly contrasted against the dark room. Huke! Kook! Phi Sora stood in the middle of the kitchen, alone. She was sobbing in front of a plate half filled with food. She sniffled once before raising a glass full of wine to her mouth. Gulp. She drank, held back her tears with difficulty, and began moving the food to her plate again. Soon, however, her hands slowed down and her head drooped low. Carefully, she placed her hand over her stomach where she was hit 3 times earlier today. Tears dripped from her eyes onto the table whenever she held back her hiccups. Sol Jihu almost entered the kitchen but stopped himself. He thought she was okay, but she really wasn't. She must have held back her tears throughout the party. Sol Jihu wanted to reach out, but he knew his consolation would be futile, that it would only hurt Phi Sora's pride even more. As dense as he wasn't insensitive. Soon,
Phi Sora wiped the tears from her face and began moving her hands again.
Sol Jihu watched her silently for a while and left. The next morning, Sol Jihu groaned as soon as he woke up.
A headache accompanied by strong dizziness made his head ring. After tossing and turning for a while, Sol Jihu staggered up from his bed and walked out. The welcoming party from hell that made even a unique rancor run away had continued throughout the night.
Sol Jihu wanted to wash up to get rid of its lingering effects.
After arriving at the first-floor lobby, Sol Jihu became speechless. Hey, my cup is empty.
Cheers.
The sun had come up, but the welcoming party was still going on.
To be more precise, a few members were still alive. The rest were sprawled on the floor, snoring loudly.
Bits and pieces of food were littered everywhere, and the entire place reeked of alcohol.
It was easy to tell that all hell broke loose here. Are their livers made of titanium alloy? Sol Jihu stared in astonishment as Cho Hong drank straight from the bottle and Hugo laughed and chatted with Audrey Basilar. Feeling like he would be forced into joining them if he was spotted, he hid his presence as much as possible and headed to the underground hot springs. Phew!
Once he soaked himself in hot water, his hangover went away to a degree.
Sol Jihu enjoyed his bath for about 2 hours before happily coming back up to the lobby.
Then, he became speechless again. It
was a mess when he came down in the morning,
but now, the lobby was cleaned spotless. Not even the last group of survivors could be found.
Sol Jihu scanned the lobby,
wondering what happened when he saw Phi Sora walking down the stairs while dusting off her hands.
Phew, it's finally clean. Those idiots, do they need to drink until they collapse to be satisfied? She grumbled while wiping off beads of sweat from her forehead.
Then, after seeing Sol Jihu, she stopped. Did you clean the whole place alone? Sol Jihu asked first.
Yes.
Phi Sora nodded her head with an icy expression. Don't misunderstand.
I only did it because I hate seeing a mess. It must have been hard.
No, it wasn't too bad thanks to someone taking all the empty bottles.
Did they take it to a recycling center for pocket change? How can there not be a single bottle left?
Sol Jihu laughed softly. If he hadn't gone to the cafeteria last night, he would have thought Phi Sora was no different than usual.
She was indeed a strong person.
Miss Phi Sora, can we talk for a bit? About what?
About this and that. Let's go for a walk.
As Sol Jihu pointed to the door, Phi Sora narrowed her eyes and hesitated.
I want to wash up too. I worked up a sweat. It won't take long. Okay. Phi Sora replied meekly as if she had no other choice.
Soon, the duo slowly strolled through the garden.
Phi Sora followed behind Sol Jihu at some distance. Her eyes were still cast downward, only staring at the ground. Sol Jihu pondered how to start the conversation and then calmly began. Can you section out an hour every day starting today or tomorrow?
An hour every day? Why?
Phi Sora asked unenthusiastically. I beat you, so you're mine now.
Is that what this is? Sol Jihu closed his eyes.
He was just about to say, it's not about the spar.
But he got rid of this thought. Just what did she think of him to worry about something so absurd?
Of course not.
Then what is it?
Yesterday. Sol Jihu took a brief pause before carefully continuing. You must have felt it too. Like you were being sucked in during the battle. Or how you struck with full force, but I was unaffected.
You might have even felt that I got stronger. Phi Sora didn't reply.
Taking her silence for a yes, Sol Jihu cut to the chase in her consideration. Don't you want to learn it?
What?
I'll teach it to you.
Not just that, but other techniques too.
Phi Sora's feet stopped.
But, there's a condition.
Sol Jihu also stopped with her and then turned back.
After seeing Phi Sora glaring at him, he closed his mouth. He could hear her breathing getting rougher.
Are you pitying me?
Her voice was like a sharp knife.
No.
Could you hear me out first? Phi Sora's cheeks reddened to the color of her hair.
She clenched her teeth and then crossed her arms. The reason I said I would teach you is simple.
It's to prepare for our future fight against the parasites.
Phi Sora furrowed her brows.
The parasites suffered consecutive defeats.
Even a mouse will bite a cat when it's cornered. There's no telling what a cornered tiger would do. Sol Jihu trailed off, but Phi Sora could guess what would have come next. For whatever reason, the parasites had left humanity alone all this time. It wasn't as if there were no battles between them, but it was negligible compared to the battles they fought with the Federation.
However, there was a huge chance that this would no longer be the case.
The parasites would throw their previous stance away and properly attack humanity from various angles. Although the Federation would feel more at ease without so much pressure, humanity being in greater danger was an undeniable truth.
The army commanders aren't our only concern either.
We have to worry about the Parasite Queen. She personally appeared in the Tiggle Fortress War, and there is a good chance that she will take matters into her own hands from now on. Phi Sora nodded her head unknowingly.
How could she forget the Parasite Queen who caused the heaven and earth to flip with her descent? Close to a year had passed since then, and the feeling of having her body and soul turn upside down was still enough to send shivers down her spine. It's not like learning this technique will guarantee a victory, but we still have to try what we can.
Phi Sora's scowling expression subsided, perhaps because she subconsciously agreed with him. She blinked her eyes and pouted.
What's the condition?
Nothing too hard. I want you to teach the technique that I'm going to show you to the rest of the members.
Huh? Phi Sora's eyes widened at the unexpected condition.
I can teach them myself, but I think I will get busy again soon.
Sorry for bothering you with this.
No, that wasn't the case. Of course, teaching someone was exhausting, but it was nothing compared to the price of learning a new technique. In reality, it was not easy to hand down a spatial technique that was developed using one's attainment in an independent realm. For someone to do this, they would have to bear a significant loss.
However, Sol Jihu wasn't offering to teach only her, but also the rest of Valhalla's members, all for the inevitable war against the parasites.
Only now did Phi Sora feel his sincerity.
Perhaps feeling embarrassed about jumping to conclusions, Phi Sora lowered her gaze and murmured.
It's not a problem for me to do that, but are you sure? If you want, we can start right now. It'll be a good morning workout.
What do you think? Really?
Okay, you said it. No takebacks.
Phi Sora instantly regained her energy. She had no reason to refuse Sol Jihu's offer when it would only help her grow stronger.
I'll do it.
Phi Sora shouted with her eyes twinkling in excitement.
Asterisk.
After teaching Phi Sora in the morning, Sol Jihu came back to his office at noon and heaved a sigh. As expected of an earthling who stepped into an independent realm, Phi Sora was a quick learner. While she wasn't able to learn the technique in just 2 hours, she seemed to have understood the principle. At this rate, it shouldn't take her long to learn up to floral substitution. After teaching her today, Sol Jihu became confident that she would have no problem until Grand Cosmic Shift. So this is what someone with a brilliant aptitude is like. Sol Jihu had chosen Phi Sora after taking her talent, current strength, and position within the organization into consideration. But now that he compared himself to her, he couldn't help but feel a little bitter. Sol Jihu smacked his lips before opening his status window. He wanted to check out the 3 skills he acquired as a reward from the trials. The first was Righteous Heart. Its rank increased to X, letting it surpass the effects of a mana cultivation and display the effects of a mana technique. However, this didn't mean that it became a mana technique right away. Black Sol Jihu had advised him to try evolving his mana cultivation to mana technique, but mana technique, which was the final stage of mana cultivation method, was not something that was so easy to grasp. Even Agnes had given up on trying to understand the complexities of mana techniques and acquired one using contribution points. In any case, Sol Jihu had been racking his brain on how to evolve Righteous Heart to a mana technique, and thanks to this reward, the burden had been lifted off his shoulders.
I can feel the difference. Sol Jihu became stronger after receiving the reward at the temple. He couldn't even imagine how powerful his skills would be if he used mana that came from utilizing a mana technique.
The second reward was Indomitable Will.
This was a newly created special rank skill. Translating its meaning directly, it would mean, a will that does not yield even in death.
However, after reading its effect in Paradise's game system terms, a gasp escaped Sol Jihu's mouth. Simply put, it was a skill that maintained his combat power at its peak state until death. As a human, it was only natural for his combat power to decrease in a prolonged battle, especially if he was injured as well. However, Indomitable Will allowed him to ignore fatigue and injuries that would build up during battle. Of course, it wouldn't protect him against exhaustion of mana or decrease in combat prowess caused by severed limbs, but its effect was still strong enough to be called broken even with such a state.
The third reward was Clear Mirror, Still Water. It was an aptitude that allowed him to calm his mind to the level of a tranquil lake at a moment's notice. To be honest, he wasn't all that happy about this reward. It was because he felt his emotions were being controlled forcefully.
However, he couldn't deny that it would come in handy in battle. Rather than being flustered in a moment of danger, it was much better to think clearly and take appropriate actions.
I got stronger. Sol Jihu closed his status window and fell into thought.
The conclusion he came to regarding his strength didn't change no matter how he thought about it.
I need someone who can be my match.
One of the biggest reasons Sol Jihu left the path of the soul was because he couldn't find any more flaws that he could fix.
But this judgment strictly came from his own thoughts. Just because he couldn't find flaws, it didn't mean he didn't have any.
That was why he wanted a proper sparring partner. If he couldn't figure out his flaws by examining himself, he figured he might be able to during battle or after a defeat.
It doesn't have to be the parasites. Perhaps there would be an Earthling or someone from the Federation that would fit the bill.
Not just someone who could touch his toes, but someone who could be his direct match. Sol Jihu thought carefully before turning to the door.
Clack, clack, clack.
The sound of high heels was ringing in the hallway.
Talk, talk.
As expected, a knock was heard after a moment, and the door opened. Kim Hannah walked in, wearing a neat, gray suit.
I brought the reports you requested yesterday.
It took some time due to the sheer volume. Not because of the welcoming party?
I'd love to make that excuse, but I left the party when things were starting to get out of hand. Kim Hannah smiled as she took out the clipboard that she was carrying under her armpit. It's been so long that I feel strange doing this. Anyway, what would you like to hear first? You can start with whatever.
I already heard about Sol and Sung Jin, so you can leave that part out.
Whatever I want.
Kim Hannah flipped through the pages of the document lodged in the clipboard.
First, she glanced at Sol Jihu before starting. It's about Miss Seo Yuhui. Her first return was about 2 months before representatives.
First return?
She came back to Paradise, but she didn't continue to stay. She couldn't even come to Valhalla because of the state her body was in. I'm sure you know the reason. I do.
To be more precise, Miss Seo Yuhui stayed for a day or two inside the temple's recovery room whenever she came back and then would return to Earth when the offerings we prepared ran out.
We would call her back through Miss Baek Haiju whenever we obtained more offerings. Those two know each other on Earth? Yes. So she has been coming back once every 2 weeks for a total of 4 times. Unfortunately, she hasn't shown any signs of recovery. In fact, her condition is getting worse each time.
Sol Jihu calmly nodded his head.
Kim Hannah carefully studied Sol Jihu's reaction. She had heard how strongly he reacted during the night raid in Harem arc, rushing to the temple as soon as he heard about the incident.
But this time, he wasn't showing any sign of being worried.
If anything, he seemed calm to the point of being cold. In any case, I took care of everything you requested me to do. Kim Hana had performed her duties excellently.
During the 8 months that Sol Jihu was gone, she reached out to every auction house in the 7 cities and bought up all the offerings.
She then sent them to the temple where Seo Yuhui would return to. It was easy to guess what the offerings were for. Seo Yuhui had lost most of her power earlier from overexerting herself in the Valley War.
Then, despite barely recovering to a decent state, she had overexerted herself again in the spirit realm and Tiggle fortress. Because she borrowed holy power from future use, she had to pay the amount back through offerings.
The problem was that this was like pouring water into a sieve.
However, it was also a reasonable price.
Most people would think this after seeing it at face value.
But as an insider, Kim Hana thought differently.
Looking back, Sol Jihu had always been at the center of everything that happened inside paradise.
But rather than consciously putting himself in these situations, his hands were usually forced from the parasite's moves.
It was different this time. Seo Yuhui was hiding something, and Sol Jihu's reaction was strange as well. Her spidey, no, foxy senses were tingling.
Something about this matter felt too strange to be taken at face value.
There had to be a scheme.
A scheme that only Seo Yuhui and Sol Jihu knew about.
One was a legend of paradise, and the other was on the path of becoming one.
With such people scheming together, Kim Hana couldn't help but wonder what huge incident and change would descend upon paradise.
And
suddenly, Sol Jihu's voice was heard. Kim Hana's silent thoughts had gone on for longer than she expected. Doing a double take inwardly, Kim Hana cleared her throat. There are a few suspicious points I want to discuss.
She carefully brought up the matter while continuing to observe Sol Jihu and then flinched abruptly.
A piercing gaze was being sent from a pair of clear pupils that were reflecting her appearance like a mirror.
Seeing this, gulp. She unknowingly swallowed hard.
Don't ask. That was what Sol Jihu's eyes were saying.
1. I asked for clarification from the author. Special rank is between pinnacle and X.
The order goes lowest to low to intermediate to high to pinnacle to special to X to grade unknown. Abilities that cannot be ranked, e.g. future vision. Suspicious points?
The corners of Sol Jihu's eyes curled up slightly.
In that instant, Kim Hana felt an indescribable, fierce sense of disharmony. It was like trying to walk across a crosswalk but having the green light flicker after taking the very first step. After hesitating for a brief moment,
yes. You see. She chose to stop without rushing across.
Because it felt like the light would turn red at a moment's notice.
I believe an external organization interfered in this matter. She quickly dropped her gaze to the clipboard and reported another matter. An external organization interfered. Did they get in our way of gathering offerings? Sol Jihu smiled softly and asked while resting his chin on his hand. Kim Hana heaved out the breath she had been holding in. No, it's the opposite.
Opposite? The main branch of the Temple of Luxuria, which is located in Scheherazade, donated offerings to us. The bishop even came to Eva personally and looked after Miss Seo Yuhui. The bishop?
Sol Jihu raised his eyebrow.
Kim Hana flipped a page on the document and continued.
Roberto Servillo. He's an Italian man from Area 2. He is a level 6 bishop who serves Luxuria. Sol Jihu blinked a couple of times and then rolled his eyes.
So, not only did they donate offerings, but a level 6 priest also came to tend to Yuhui Nuna. He then glanced at Kim Hana. That sounds like something we should be grateful for.
What's the reason you called it interfering? It's simple.
Kim Hana continued.
Roberto Servillo and Miss Seo Yuhui are not on friendly terms.
This is the first time I've heard of this. That's natural. Roberto Servillo knows how to conduct himself in the public eye, so his less than friendly relationship with Miss Seo Yuhui is not known to the masses. That means that he's hiding it, so how do you know about it?
It's a long explanation. But the Temple of Luxuria once enjoyed an era of prosperity along with the Temple of Gula.
That was when Sung Shi-hyun and Miss Seo Yuhui were active as executors.
Sol Ji-hoo nodded his head,
gesturing at her to keep going.
But their cordial relationship didn't last long.
After the Empire Raid expedition, the two executors parted ways for unknown reasons, and Sung Shi-hyun then joined Sinyoung. Miss Seo Yuhui quit her position as an executor and retired from Paradise around the same time, and Sung Shi-hyun went missing not long afterward.
Who would have thought he defected to the parasites?
Sol Ji-hoo snorted. Anyway, so? The Temple of Luxuria was naturally put in a difficult position. With the executors that acted as their pillars of support gone, their past domineering attitude came back to bite them. Recalling the incident he experienced in Harem, Sol Ji-hoo smacked his lips. The mysterious group was desperate to attack him when he didn't do anything to them. So he could guess how passionate they must have been in attacking the Temple of Luxuria, which must have been flaunting its political power. The Temple of Luxuria's influence diminished by the day. Still, with how rare healing priests were, there was a constant demand for their members, so they were able to maintain a certain level of influence. But they must have wanted to regain their past influence, which went above the Magicians' Guild, or maybe they felt threatened by the pressure from their surroundings. Regardless, after Miss Seo Yuhui retired, the bishop, who was the representative of the Temple of Luxuria, made a certain decision. Decision?
He joined hands with Sinyoung.
Kim Hana said firmly.
Aha! Sol Ji-hoo exclaimed.
Now that you mention it, you used to be with Sinyoung.
You overhear interesting stories while following board members.
I paid attention back then.
As a former distinguished manager from Sinyoung, it wasn't surprising that Kim Hana would know about such internal matters.
Sinyoung, huh?
I didn't think I'd hear their name here.
Sol Ji-hoo tapped on the table with his finger.
Sinyoung's Yun Seahui did not have a good relationship with Miss Baek Haiju and Miss Seo Yuhui.
This was an open secret. So you're saying Yuhui Nuna and Yun Seahui weren't on good terms, and because Roberto Servillo joined hands with Sinyoung, Yuhui Nuna didn't see him in a good light?
I can't be certain.
Considering Miss Seo Yuhui's gentle personality, there is a chance she did not mind it too much.
But we can't rule out any possibilities. There might be something only she knows about as well.
Kim Hana continued. To be honest, I don't think Roberto Servillo made the wrong decision. The Temple of Luxuria was in need of a new partner organization, and Miss Seo Yuhui had retired at that point.
In other words, Seo Yuhui wasn't in the position to criticize the bishop's decision.
The reason I judged that the bishop's relationship with Miss Seo Yuhui was bad is because of Miss Seo Yuhui being on guard against him. Quote.
She was thought to have retired from Paradise forever, but she came back. An earthling that is a legend of Paradise and the star of lust.
As you know, Miss Seo Yuhui's influence among Luxuria's priests is unhindered and unrivaled. Sol Ji-hoo agreed easily. He could tell just by how she led members of the Temple of Luxuria's main branch during the Valley War.
Even now, there are many priests who wish for Miss Seo Yuhui's return. Luxuria is also asserting that she is still the apostle.
Given all this, what do you think the person who believes he protected the Temple of Luxuria all this time would think?
So you're saying this is a matter of desire for political power?
Sol Ji-hoo chuckled.
But it didn't look like Yuhui Nuna cared all that much about political power or her influence. People who are at the top of their fields usually don't care. It is the runner-ups who are antsy to get ahead.
Sol Ji-hoo rubbed his chin slowly.
He understood the background story to an extent.
The bishop, who did not want Seo Yuhui's return more than anyone else, had come to help her personally.
It was indeed strange. And there is something else I have to tell you.
Kim Hana spoke.
We ran into the bishop once while we were guarding Miss Seo Yuhui. Roberto Servillo, the bishop, asked about Representative's whereabouts.
About my whereabouts?
Yes.
He requested to see you, saying that he had something to say.
When I told him you were away on important business,
he asked if it was because of Miss Co Yuhui and when you would be coming back. So what did you tell him?
I said I would call you to find out and didn't say anything else. I figured it would be better to let him run his imaginations wild.
Sol Jihu smiled at Kim Hana's response.
Good job.
Was it?
Yep, that was the perfect response. I'd give you a well done stamp if I could. Kim Hana smiled bitterly, seeing Sol Jihu's exaggerated happiness.
What should we do from now on?
Easy. Just continue as we normally have.
What do you mean?
Go around auction houses buying offerings and then calling Yuhui Nuna through Miss Baek Haiju.
Actually, you don't have to worry about going to auction houses.
I plan on going personally. Sol Jihu got up from his seat and stretched. Do the other reports have anything urgent? No, there's nothing much except for Miss Co Yuhui's matter.
Then I'll listen to the rest later.
I want to focus on this for now. Sol Jihu finally started up his engine. Kim Hana drew her breath subtly. Understood. Alright, you can go now. I need some time to think about this alone.
Kim Hana put the clipboard back under her armpit. However, she didn't leave.
Rather than turning around, she walked forward and stood in front of Sol Jihu's desk. Hey! Now that the official business was over, she placed the clipboard down on the desk and narrowed her eyes. Aren't you being a bit too shameless?
Maybe? Sol Jihu winked. Sorry, but we're not at the stage to reveal anything yet.
Still, shouldn't you at least throw me a hint or two?
Kim Hana had worked her butt off during the 8 months that Sol Jihu was gone, so it was understandable that she would feel disappointed. Not as a subordinate, but as a human being.
I guess I was a little harsh on Valhalla's queen. Queen, my ass. What was it again, Gina's mom? Don't you know a true couple shares even their most secretive fetishes in bed? What queen? You're treating me like an office wife. I wasn't that bad. The couple exchanged jokes while giggling. Anyway, if you're sorry, let me follow you to the auction houses.
I won't get in your way.
You don't really have to, but I guess you can if you're free.
Let me ask you for a favor too. A favor?
Yep.
Teach me how to act.
It was a seemingly random favor. He was saying he would go to auction houses but was now asking her to teach him how to act. Kim Hana couldn't figure out what Sol Jihu was planning, but she nodded her head nonetheless.
If that's what you want.
Sol Jihu went to work right away. Starting from Eva, he went through all the auction houses in every city.
Kim Hana stayed by Sol Jihu's side and observed the situation carefully.
In truth, there was nothing noteworthy about it. He was doing the same thing she had been doing while he was gone.
The only difference was that he showed signs of being overly obsessed with obtaining offerings.
That was what he looked like, at least from the outside.
He bought any offering that made its way to the auction, no matter how big or small the holy power contained inside it was, and he even visited high-level priests and pleaded with them to sell him offerings in their possession.
He did not hesitate to purchase them above the market price.
This was simply throwing money into the fire in Kim Hana's eyes, but as promised, she only followed him silently and did not hinder him in any way.
It was because a rumor started going around.
A rumor that Valhalla's representative had returned after being gone for a long time and that he was buying up offerings without regard for the price. She was sure Sol Jihu had his reason for all of this. This wasn't a conjecture, but a near certainty, as he returned to being normal the moment he came back to Valhalla's building, and away from the public eye.
And just like that, as he spent his days racking up offerings, unexpected guests visited Valhalla. While Sol Jihu was swirling the ice cubes inside his drink wondering when Miss Baek Haiju would come back, the door burst open and several people rushed in. Representative Sel. He looked up, wondering whom the cheerful voice belonged to.
The guests were none other than the Magic Girl trio that included the branch head of Eva's Magicians Guild. "Where have you been?"
"You just came back."
A light brown-haired girl came rushing in.
"I wanted to see you."
Adelette Delphine slammed her hands down on the desk. Sol Jihu blinked.
"It's been a while."
"Yes. It has." Adelette Delphine had an incredibly heightened tone for some reason.
"I have a big favor to ask."
"A favor?"
"Yes."
Adelette Delphine thumped her chest. "Let me come." Sol Jihu spat out the ice water he was drinking. "Come?
"Where? I want to come too."
What are you talking about?"
"You know, there."
"She can't possibly be talking about there, can she?" Sol Jihu wiped his lips and stared at Adelette Delphine dumbfoundedly.
He.
On the other hand, Charlotte Aria was smiling like a fool, perhaps happy to finally see Sol Jihu. For some reason, Un Yuri was staring into the far distance, fiddling with an inflatable cheering stick that one would expect to see at a baseball game. Now that he thought about it, he heard that these girls started holding regular meetings to discuss magic. Only now did Sol Jihu realize what Adelette Delphine meant. "Why are you asking me that?"
"Ah!
Let me come."
"Plias?" Adelette Delphine dropped to the floor and began rolling around. Please tilde."
She started throwing a temper tantrum with her arms raised into the air. Charlotte must have found this amusing as she quickly joined in with her.
"Let her tilde. Let her tilde. Roll tilde to the left. Roll tilde to the right."
With two people doing this, it quickly got out of hand. Sol Jihu glanced at Un Yuri, hoping she would do something about it, but became speechless instead.
Go! Un Yuri was cheering them on, waving the long cheering sticks to the beat of their rolling.
With an expressionless face, Sol Jihu closed his eyes. Adelette Delphine and Un Yuri aside, he remembered hearing Charlotte Aria becoming a respectable queen who was capable of leading a nation, but
she didn't grow at all. "Your Majesty." Once Sol Jihu looked down with the eyes of a disappointed teacher, Charlotte Aria quickly calmed down. If Sir Sword Kun sees this, he will be very disappointed. This seemed to have done the trick as Charlotte Aria tottered back up. "No. It's just been a while since I last saw you. So I wanted to be spoiled. I still carry myself with dignity when it's important." And I wasn't planning on telling her at first. But Delphine noticed that Yuri and I were growing abnormally fast. I asked teacher and she only said she'd think about it. So we figured she would immediately come to a decision if Valhalla's representative asked her, so. Charlotte Aria rubbed her thumbs together with her head lowered. Sol Jihu shook his head. "Sure, go ahead." "Really? Really?" Two children, no, Charlotte Aria and Adelette Delphine raised their heads. Sol Jihu would gladly have said yes if they came to ask him normally. Not only was he in a cooperative relationship with Adelette Delphine, but he also knew her talent. If she could become stronger and play a bigger role in future battles, Sol Jihu would only welcome it. "You know how to take her to the dream world, right?" Go and ask Lady Russell if she can take in Miss Adelette Delphine as well. She might even be listening in on this conversation. Just know that I can't do anything if she says no." "Yay! Woo!" The two children shot their hands up with a loud cheer. They ran out, chattering and clapping their hands joyfully as if Russell had already given them the answer. Only afterward could Sol Jihu pause to breathe. He then glanced at Un Yuri, who was hiding behind the inflatable cheering sticks, and laughed. "Does Lady Russell not want to accept Miss Adelette Delphine as a disciple?" Un Yuri shook her head. "No, not at all. She thinks highly of her." "Does she?" "Yes. About our talents, teacher said that mine was heaven endowed,
that Her Majesty Aria's was precious, and that Delphine's was special. Now that she mentioned it, their aptitudes were vaguely different.
Genius, prodigy, and brilliant.
Having the three competing against each other sounded fun.
It seemed like there would be a positive synergistic effect too. It's just, the timing was a bit off. Yuri continued.
She has to choose a successor, so with more disciples, there is more to worry about.
She's surprisingly soft-hearted.
Sol Jihu did a double take.
In truth, Yuri was the most likely candidate for inheriting Rasel's eternal light of wisdom. But with his earlier decision, she now had another competitor to worry about. It's fine.
Noticing what Sol Jihu's thoughts were, Yuri put out the cheering sticks that she was hiding behind.
I would have given you some sort of signal if I didn't want more competitors. Without waving these. I'm happy to have her on board.
Really?
Yes. You see, the three of us fight all the time when we meet because the paths we're pursuing are totally different. Yuri was a mage, Charlotte Aria was a sorcerer, and Odelette Delphine was a magician. I always hated hearing her go on about how magic is something that follows preconceived laws. Now that we're on the same terms, I can use this chance to stomp her flat.
If teacher chooses me, that smelly magician will know her place better. Yuri then snorted and sneered, HMPH, magic that sets a limit on itself is no magic. Sol Jihu was taken aback after hearing her honest thoughts, as what he expected to hear was more along the lines of, we'll compete in good faith and do our best.
You must be confident.
A mage without confidence is just a corpse.
But Yuri smacked her lips. I'm not so sure now. Recently, all I am getting from teacher is scolding and more scolding.
She's scolding you?
Yes. She says that someone pursuing the limits of the path of mana shouldn't go around tasting everything and should only dig one well to the absolute bottom.
Sol Jihu grew curious hearing this and activated his innate ability. Ek! He almost yelled in surprise after seeing Yuri's status window. Ever since he entered paradise, he had never seen such a long and complicated status window. How does she have so many abilities?
What the heck is ESP aptitude? And what's extrasensory perception? It wasn't just her abilities.
Her aptitude had also gotten longer. Don't worry about it too much.
Yuri said calmly. I won't let the eternal light of wisdom be taken away from me.
Being scolded often is only proof of her interest, isn't it?
Well,
I guess there's the saying, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Exactly. All right.
If I have to invest in something, I'll be sure to choose the silver glass coin.
Silver glass coin. Yuri glared at Sol Jihu. It was a joke. Kuum.
Anyways, it looks like you've been busy lately. Sorry for bothering you.
I'll leave now. Okay. By the way. Yuri paused in the middle of turning around and gave Sol Jihu a furtive look.
Has anything been troubling you recently? Sol Jihu's eyes widened before he smiled blandly. Haha. Then can I ask you for a favor?
Of course. It's nothing difficult.
Can you let Odelette Delphine know that I will be calling Mr. Philip Muller soon about something? That's it?
Yes. But. Sol Jihu lowered his voice and whispered some more. Yuri tilted her head but agreed nonetheless.
That's all I have to do.
Yes. Got it. Yuri bowed and then left the office. I thought it was funny.
Silver glass coin.
Sol Jihu giggled to himself. In any case, he was thankful that Yuri was doing well by herself.
But he couldn't be content.
Time wasn't infinite.
8 months. That was enough for the parasites to have recovered from their defeat at Tiggle Fortress to a degree. Before they rise back up, he had to succeed. The last of the 3 goals he vowed to achieve when he left Harem and moved to Eva.
Asterisk. It was around dinner time the next day that Baek Haiju entered paradise.
Sol Ji-hoo asked her to call Seo Yuhui as soon as he saw her, and Baek Haiju came back the very same day with a reply.
I contacted Miss Seo Yuhui. She said she would enter paradise by tomorrow in paradise's time. The moment Sol Ji-hoo had been waiting for was finally here.
The day when he would reunite with Seo Yuhui.
And the day to raise the curtain to the final plan.
1. Upon using Un Yuri's name.
Un means silver, Yuri means glass. Investing in a coin is a cryptocurrency reference, i.e. Bitcoin. Under the pitch.
The desolate streets in the middle of the night were deathly still, except for the incessant chirping of insects.
Talk. A window of a room on top of a building suddenly closed shut, and a black curtain was pulled closed behind it.
As even the moonlight was shut off, darkness swamped the room.
Forgive me. The insects were annoying. Quote.
Don't they sound just like crickets?
They sound like something boiling. An elderly voice was heard from the direction of the window.
How long do I have to wait?
While a different voice was heard from the center of the room. It was a low voice that was neither aged nor young. That same question again.
Why are you in such a hurry?
The voice, accompanied by low laughter, moved from the window towards the center of the room.
There's no helping it. At this rate, the parasites will treat humanity as its main enemy.
No, they might already think so.
I suppose. The outcome of the battle at Tiggle Fortress was surprising, both for us and for the parasites. But isn't it fine?
Since they've won the war.
Fine?
Enough with the jokes. The dignified voice sharpened. Do you think that the parasites will perish just because of 1 or 2 defeats? No, absolutely not. The parasites' forces are immortal. All they have to do is remake however much they lost each time.
The slightly angry voice continued. That's not all. The revival of the World Tree? An alliance with the Federation? All is vain in the face of absolute power. Half of the Federation's core army was annihilated when the parasite queen unleashed her aura just once.
It's hard to believe, but I've heard that as well. If that's what she is capable of when she hasn't completely descended, then when she recovers her full powers. The fiery voice began to soften.
Ever since that bastard from the Sung family switched sides, the possibility of her recovering her divinity has risen. After a moment of silence, the voice continued calmly. When that day comes, humanity is done for. They won't even be able to hold out as the Federation did.
Well,
that's true. The man who had been listening quietly gave a chuckle.
If everything happens the way you think, then our current situation could certainly be described as a crisis.
He then continued.
Only if everything goes as you say, that is.
You make it sound like that won't be the case.
No, you misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with being vigilant. Only, isn't it better to focus on what's happening now than to worry about what hasn't happened yet?
What do you mean?
I agree that the parasites won't leave humanity alone anymore.
But that means they will now have to deal with 2 camps at once. That will certainly put a lot of pressure on them.
Damn it. Don't you think I know that already?
The frustrated voice exploded out. Don't you think you're being too optimistic?
Our victories up until now have been mere coincidences. Our goalkeeper miraculously managed to block the ball after our mindless defenders let every attacker slip past them. Hoo-hoo.
From now on, humanity will be subject to many fierce attacks. Do you think we'll be able to block them all?
I assure you, the answer is no. And if we let the parasites cross the goal line even just once, we're done for. If you can't attack, you can't score.
Through this analogy, he pointed out that humanity was in no position to attack the parasites.
Please calm down. I think you misunderstood me. The elderly voice was still calm, as opposed to his partners. I didn't mean that we should resist the parasites.
What I'm trying to say is, the wrinkles around his mouth deepened in the dark.
We should put ourselves in their shoes for a moment.
You're right. The parasites will win if they can score just 1 goal, but they keep failing by a hair's breadth.
Can you imagine how frustrated they must be? Quote.
Let's think this way. So there they are, all frustrated and restless when suddenly a player from the opposing team scores an own goal. How would they feel about that player?
Quote. Perhaps we could use the current situation to our advantage. People never appreciate help when they're thriving. It's when they're in a crisis that they truly appreciate a gesture of help.
You say all the right things, but…
There was a sneering sound. Do you not find yourself hypocritical? You say one thing and do another. There's an Asian proverb that says, "First knock on the stone bridge before crossing it." The elderly voice remained calm regardless. It's my favorite proverb. I believe people my age can easily relate to it as I myself have experienced it. In many cases I thought the bridge looked as sturdy as it could be, only to find out later that it was defective. Ha!
Have you ever heard of this saying?
Time is gold.
The enemy isn't stupid.
Suddenly the aged voice grew stern. It's not that I haven't looked into it. But the more I looked into it, the more confused I became. I know it's been almost a year, but that's not enough reason to move forward with our plan.
So you're saying you won't do anything until all of your questions have been answered?
Yes, and rightly so. Please recall that even the parasite queen couldn't stop him, a mere human.
A coincidence? A miracle?
Perhaps. Even so, I won't be able to rest until I know we have a countermeasure against this so-called miracle. Only then did he let out a small sigh. We only have one chance.
After a moment of silence, the figure in the dark got up with a soft rustle.
There will be no second chances.
We have to prove our worth on the first try.
Creak. With those words, the sound of a door opening was heard. Light flashed into the room before quickly disappearing. Prove our worth on the first try.
Could it be? The other figure seemed to have realized something and quickly left as well.
The empty room became quiet again. Only the faint chirping of insects remained. Asterisk.
Xiao Yuhui finally returned. She had to go back to Earth in the first place because her health was so poor that it deteriorated each second she spent in paradise. As if to prove that wasn't an excuse, Xiao Yuhui's face paled the moment she stepped out of the warp gate.
She fell almost immediately and tumbled down the stairs.
Sol Jihu, who had been waiting for her next to the warp gate, tried to approach her only to be beaten by the other members. Having experienced similar situations in the past, they moved quickly and efficiently.
Kazuki carried Xiao Yuhui on his back and the rest either scanned the surroundings or cleared the way to the recovery room. The recovery room was full of offerings that the members of Valhalla had collected for months. When Kazuki laid Xiao Yuhui on the bed, luxurious priests who had gathered in advance of her arrival chanted their spells in unison. Whoosh! A huge lump of light soared from the pile of offerings and struck Xiao Yuhui.
To see about a dozen priests standing around the altar with their arms extended towards Xiao Yuhui as the holy power extracted from the offerings showered down on her. The sight was almost magnificent. Sol Jihu stared into the room from the hallway with a nervous look. He couldn't believe that such an enormous amount of holy power was tantamount to pouring only a few drops of oil on the dying embers. Sol Jihu suddenly frowned. Why did he think Xiao Yuhui was still a patient? He had most definitely given her Moirai's souvenir. But even after reminding himself of that fact, Sol Jihu still felt worried. Xiao Yuhui's fair skin seemed devoid of any life, making her look like she was dead.
Twitch. The way her fingers trembled and her body arched in a spasm kept him on the edge of his seat. When blood began to drip from her nose and mouth, his anxiety reached its peak. Perhaps. It finally occurred to him that Xiao Yuhui's life might really be at stake here. It was true that he had given her Moirai's souvenir, but he never witnessed her using it. If that were really the case, he couldn't put his mind at ease. Because that would mean she was carrying out this plan of hers with her life on the line. Sol Ji-hoo bit down on his teeth and clenched his fists. Meanwhile, Kim Hana nodded her head while seeing Sol Ji-hoo's acting. "He's better than I thought."
His pleading eyes and uncomfortable gestures were all too natural. Kim Hana fully believed Sol Ji-hoo was acting given his relationship with Seo Yoo-hui and their previous conversation when he asked her to teach him how to act. Soon, by the time holy power was fully sucked out of all the offerings, Seo Yoo-hui's treatment came to an end.
The priests all took a deep breath and left the recovery room.
Sol Ji-hoo stopped one priest and asked him about Seo Yoo-hui's condition. Right now, Lady Seo Yoo-hui is kind of like a glass bottle with holes," the male priest said as he wiped off the sweat from his forehead.
"You can think of the water inside the glass bottle as life force.
It should be holy power, but because she does not have any holy power left in her body, it is taking her life force instead. Then, thanks to all the offerings you brought, we managed to fill up the glass bottle with water. But because of the holes, the water is quickly leaking out even as we speak." What
we can say for certain is that it will be impossible to fill up the holes until she pays off the holy power that she owes. The problem is that we have no way to estimate just how much more she needs," the male priest said dejectedly and sighed. He then bowed slightly and stepped away. Sol Ji-hoo stood still for a long time before slowly stepping into the recovery room. Click. He closed the door and walked closer. Seo Yoo-hui had her eyes closed with a peaceful expression. Her disheveled silky hair and her picturesque figure were sprawled on the altar, and she looked weak and pure like a peach blossom that was about to fall. Sol Ji-hoo knelt next to the altar and carefully grasped Seo Yoo-hui's hand. He could feel the tenderness of her hand, but it was also frighteningly cold. Placing his hand on her ice-cold forehead, Sol Ji-hoo slowly closed his eyes. How much time went by? Seo Yoo-hui woke up, feeling that something was out of place. Her body was held tightly, but it felt rather safe. A gentle warmth was enveloping her body like the times when she was being hugged by her father as a child. Seo Yoo-hui's eyelids slowly fluttered open, and her eyes immediately widened. The touch of slender yet robust muscles could be felt. Looking up stealthily, she saw a face that was deep asleep. It was the face she always dreamed of seeing. Now realizing that Sol Ji-hoo was sleeping with her in his embrace, her nape quickly reddened. "Ji-hoo." She whispered his name, but there was no reply. He seemed to have fallen asleep while watching over her. "It's warm." Burying her face in Sol Ji-hoo's chest, Seo Yoo-hui's expression soon turned strange. It felt good, but the feeling that something was out of place didn't disappear. Thinking about it carefully, she figured out why. "I like the change of pace, but…" Seo Yoo-hui placed her hands on Sol Ji-hoo's shoulders before smoothly pulling him down. "I like this more." Tightly hugging Sol Ji-hoo's head as it rested on her chest, Seo Yoo-hui smiled sweetly. "Ji-hoo, my cutie Tilda Nuna really wanted to see our Ji-hoo Tilda." While Seo Yoo-hui rubbed her cheek on Sol Ji-hoo's head and enjoyed the rising feeling of satisfaction, Sol Ji-hoo rustled as if he was being suffocated. What's gotten into him?" Seo Yoo-hui was bewildered. In the past, he would have blissfully smiled before digging his face into her chest. Now, it seemed like he was trying to distance himself from her. Just when she was about to feel sad, Sol Ji-hoo's eyes shot open. Seeing that Seo Yoo-hui was awake, he sprang up. Seo Yoo-hui also slowly raised herself into a sitting posture. The warm gazes of the man and woman met. It was a reunion after almost a full year. However, to Sol Ji-hoo, it was like seeing her for the first time in 7 years. Seo Yoo-hui was also aware of this fact after hearing about it from Baek Haiju. "Nuna." Sol Ji-hoo called out in a hoarse voice with a blank face. "Yes." Seo Yuhui nodded while smiling and making an expression as if she understood everything. Nuna. Yes. Nuna. Yes. In the next moment, the man and woman emotionally wrapped themselves in each other's embrace at the same time. They clung to each other like magnets and shared the joy of a touching reunion. I missed you, I really did. Me too, me too. I missed you so much that I bought and raised a white rabbit. Huh? A white rabbit? What's that about? I don't know. Anyways, are you fine? Your trials were hard, weren't they? Over 10 minutes went by, but neither side even thought about pulling away. In fact, they clung onto each other even more. Kuum. That was until they heard a dry cough. Sol Ji-hoo and Seo Yuhui turned to the side simultaneously. An old man stood by the door, wearing a fancy priest's robe embroidered with golds. He was giving them an uncomfortable look. Excuse me. I knocked multiple times and spoke up, but there was no answer. It didn't look like it would end anytime soon, so perhaps they went a little too far. The man and woman slowly pulled away with reddened faces. The old man chuckled. It was a gentle smile that was reminiscent of Ian's. The two of you never cease to amaze me. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes widened. The old man was talking like he had seen him before. The old man did a double take. Ah, my apologies, I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Roberto Servillo. I serve goddess Luxuria. Though I am still inexperienced, I am the acting bishop. Ah, I know. Anyone in paradise that doesn't know Representative Sol would be a spy. Roberto Servillo winked. I know this is only our first meeting, but may I check up on Lady Seo Yuhui's condition? Of course. Rather, please do. Sol Ji-hoo immediately took a couple of steps back. I disinfected my hands before coming, so please bear with me for just a moment. Roberto Servillo said with a smile and then placed his palm on her back. After a few minutes, he pulled away with a sigh. How is she? Sol Ji-hoo asked in a hurry. Roberto Servillo's complexion darkened. It's not good. Pardon? The holy power we injected just a moment ago is already showing signs of running out. It's leaking out even faster than before. Lady Seo Yuhui should know this better than anyone else. Seo Yuhui didn't say anything. She showed no change in emotion at all. I regret to say this, but at this rate. Roberto Servillo smacked his lips before continuing quietly. I believe it is best that she return to Earth this instant. The atmosphere in the room quickly died down. Sol Ji-hoo was at a loss for what to do. He turned to Seo Yuhui and then lowered his head. Nuna. I'm sorry. I tried my best, but… Seo Yuhui showed a sorrowful expression without saying anything. Roberto Servillo rubbed his chin while looking back and forth between the speechless man and woman. If it's all right with you, I would like to talk with Representative Sol for a bit. With Ji-hoo? Seo Yuhui blinked twice. Then, yes. Don't worry. It won't take long. I simply need to have a word with… Ah! While Roberto Servillo was talking, she suddenly dropped her head and clutched onto her chest. Nuna. Are you okay? Seeing her in pain, Sol Ji-hoo rushed toward her. As he held her in his arms with the old man behind him, Seo Yuhui slowly raised her lowered head. At that instant, Sol Ji-hoo could clearly see. From Seo Yuhui's pain-wrought face, her eyes furrowed and then smoothed out. Almost like she was blinking. The day we meet again. Twice while looking at Roberto Servillo. When enemies are around us. And then once while looking at him. I will blink at you 3 times. Seo Yuhui blinked her eyes 3 times. What a surprise. Talk. Roberto Servillo said as he closed the recovery room's door. She was okay with you touching her back. It seems she has changed a lot. What do you mean? Ah, you didn't know? When Sol Ji-hoo asked,
Feeling confused, the bishop turned his head and replied.
Lady Xiao Yuhui avoids uncleanliness so much that it nears mysophobia. She detested even the slightest touch from foreign things.
Really?
It looks like this is the first time you've heard of this. I guess it wouldn't hurt for me to tell you.
Do you remember how I told Lady Xiao Yuhui that I disinfected my hands before coming here? In the past, whenever she had an unavoidable reason to be touched by someone, she made sure they didn't have a speck of dust on their hands. The bishop raised his left hand and smiled.
She even wiped her hands at the end of every battle.
It's certainly odd, but she took care of it meticulously so that it didn't bring harm to others.
It was hard to believe that Xiao Yuhui was such a clean freak. Suddenly wondering what Xiao Yuhui was like in the past, Sol Jihu tilted his head. It's hard to believe, isn't it? I felt the same way when I opened the door. For someone who avoided making contact with others like a plague to be hugging a man.
The bishop shook his head.
Though there was a period of inactivity, I still cannot get used to it. She changed so much that she's like a different person.
Let's go. The bishop started walking in the middle of his speech. Where was he going?
Sol Jihu was somewhat nervous, but he followed him without showing it outwardly. The corridor was longer than he thought. There was no end in sight even after walking for several minutes without talking. Come to think of it, wasn't there a huge welcoming party in Valhalla not too long ago? While they were walking for some time, the bishop suddenly asked. Yes.
How did you know?
Representative Sol returning to paradise has been the talk of the town for a while. To tell you the truth, I was jumping from joy when I heard the news.
Initially, when I heard that you were gone for 8 months, I was worried that you retired from paradise. The bishop then added with a hearty laugh, what would we do if the only one capable of combating the parasites disappeared?
To be honest,
it wasn't the time to be throwing a party. Sol Jihu smiled bitterly.
I invested 8 months of time and returned empty-handed. But I couldn't really say no when it was obvious that my friends were throwing the party to cheer me up. Returning empty-handed after investing 8 months of your time.
Did something important happen?
It was about Yuhui Nuna.
The bishop stopped.
I see. He turned and started walking in the left corridor.
It sounds like you've been searching for a way to save Lady Xiao Yuhui these past 8 months, but failed.
I did find a way.
Sol Jihu sighed.
It's just that it couldn't come to fruition. I guess I did fail if you put it like that.
The bishop nodded slowly. So that's why you said sorry. There's something I'm curious about now. May I?
Yes, go ahead.
Did Representative Sol really want to save Lady Xiao Yuhui? Sol Jihu frowned.
This question suddenly came out of nowhere.
Pardon?
Yes, of course.
Do you really mean that? The bishop asked again as Sol Jihu replied in a fluster.
Sol Jihu made a displeased expression.
I don't know why you're saying this all of a sudden, but I wholeheartedly wanted to save Yuhui Nuna.
She saved my life before, and it's also my fault that she is in her current state.
If you really mean that.
The bishop glanced back slightly.
Pardon my bluntness, but was there a need to go that far? Excuse me? The bishop stopped. Before anyone noticed, the duo had entered a small, quiet room.
What I mean is... The bishop slowly turned around and looked at Sol Jihu. You already have an item that could heal Lady Xiao Yuhui, so was there a need to be away for 8 months? He seemed to be reproaching Sol Jihu. Sol Jihu looked at the bishop in a daze before furrowing his brows.
Are you perhaps talking about Moirai's souvenir? The bishop nodded his head frighteningly. Don't misunderstand.
I found out about it while I was searching for a way to save Lady Xiao Yuhui. I remembered the item being in the VIP store of the neutral zone, so I had my subordinates check. It turned out that someone already purchased the item.
I believe the buyer's name was Un Yuri.
The bishop gave a sharp look. Sol Jihu closed his eyes and sighed. I would have used Moirai's souvenir, if I still had it.
Does that mean you no longer have it in your possession?
That's right. Moirai's souvenir was expended in the last war.
At Tiggle Fortress, you mean? Sol Jihu shook his head.
No, I used the item in the spirit realm. The bishop's eyes widened.
At the time, I believed the parasites had 6 army commanders and expected 5 to go to Tiggle Fortress.
In other words, I judged that at least one army commander would be inside the spirit realm, so I took Moirai's souvenir to deal with the army commander there.
To deal with the army commander inside the spirit realm?
I'm sure you know it too.
The reason that army commanders usually have their divinity sealed.
Of course.
When they release it, they can display power rivaling a god on the basis of terrifying holy power, but the duration is short and they need a long time to recover afterward.
Exactly. Moirai's souvenir was a secret weapon that aimed for this weakness. After pushing the army commander to a corner and forcing them to release their divinity, we planned to inject the near-infinite amount of holy power that Moirai's souvenir carried and amplify the fundamental imbalance in the army commander's energies. Ho!
That's quite the method. And what was the result? I'm standing here, aren't I?
Sol Jihu smacked his lips. Unfortunately, there were 2 army commanders inside the spirit realm. Not one. We had no choice but to use Moirai's souvenir.
Sol Jihu continued calmly. You may not know this, but our success in saving the spirit realm was a miracle that resulted from a series of coincidences.
We were on the brink of complete destruction and had to use every card in our arsenal to survive. The bishop nodded his head.
So that's what happened. Not much is known about what happened in the spirit realm, so this old man misunderstood.
No, it's fine.
Before I apologize, there's one more thing I'd like to ask.
Sol Jihu furrowed his brows, but the bishop continued unfazed. I believe Representative Sol has received an incredible amount of contribution points from this war. So I'm wondering.
As the bishop trailed off suggestively, Sol Jihu shook his head again. If you're asking why I didn't use contribution points to save Yuhui Nuna, I can only tell you that I didn't have enough. The bishop's eyes lit up. Is that so? That's surprising. Have you used a divine wish before, Bishop?
No.
I've never amassed contribution points to that degree.
I've used it once before. To revive that magician named Un Yuri, correct?
So he even knows about that? Sol Jihu murmured inwardly before continuing.
Yes. It was thanks to the contribution points I gained by personally killing Undying Diligence in the Arden Valley War.
Then how come this time? Do you know on what basis contribution points are given out?
I doubt you're asking for the obvious answer. The bishop thought for a moment before doing a double take. But it wasn't me, but Un Yuri who bought Moirai's souvenir. The priests within my organization were the ones who used it. And it was Mr. Ace Kazuki who forced Raging Temperance to unleash his divinity. Sol Jihu seized the initiative before the bishop could say anything. The same goes for the other items used in the last war.
To be honest, I didn't do much. Passing through the astral world? It was thanks to the Halep siblings.
Reviving the world tree?
Mr. Marcel Guionia risked his life to achieve that.
I probably don't need to mention the Tiggle Fortress War. The bishop's head spun.
This wasn't too hard to believe given that Sol Jihu was only level 5, but this was also the man who had killed the first army commander. But at the Arden Valley War, Sol Jihu had used an awakening skill using his life as collateral, and Seo Yuhui's current state was a direct result of trying to save him from death. Sol Jihu's explanation made perfect sense if, as a result, both Seo Yuhui and Sol Jihu could no longer use the awakening skills they did back then.
Of course, I received some compensation. I did contribute to a good degree in that war, after all. Still, his contribution was a lot more indirect compared to personally killing Undying Diligence. As a result, the contribution points he received were far less in comparison.
That was Sol Jihu's explanation.
People around me hail me as a hero, but I'm really just an average guy who got incredibly lucky.
Sol Jihu spoke self-mockingly with a bitter smile. The bishop listened quietly before replying.
Can you tell me what you have been up to these past 8 months?
Sol Jihu smoothed down his face with his hands as if he was tired of the bishop's unceasing questions.
I tried to infiltrate the empire.
The empire? You mean the parasite's territory?
Yes. I wanted to use my remaining contribution points to facilitate Yuhui Nuna's recovery.
Since I didn't have enough to use a divine wish, I had to think of another method.
So I pleaded with Gyula, asking her to tell me how to save Yuhui Nuna in exchange for contribution points.
You said you found a way? Thankfully, yes. Gyula told me of a location where a large number of offerings are buried. It was in a region where the old Rothshire clan, known as the Spear of the Empire, resided. Rothshire?
Isn't that one of the 4 great clans of the old empire and the clan that was wiped out by the Gorgonu clan?
The bishop spoke as if he didn't expect to hear the name, Rothshire.
Sol Jihu also stared at the bishop with a look of surprise. It seemed he wasn't just capable in politics, but was also well versed in Paradise's history. The Rothshire clan's offerings. That makes sense.
They were the ones who served castitas. As the bishop murmured to himself, Sol Jihu suppressed the impulse to clutch onto the pendant that was shaking inside his clothes.
Trying to infiltrate the empire must mean that this location is within the parasite's territory.
Exactly. Why didn't you take anyone with you? This hardly seems like a place you should go alone.
It's not that I didn't have anyone to ask. But I couldn't force myself to drag my comrades who were already worn out from war. I also judged it was better to move with a few people rather than a large group.
Ah, you must have thought the parasites wouldn't be on guard after their huge defeat.
My biggest oversight was thinking that they wouldn't recover so quickly.
After reaching this point, Sol Jihu heaved out a deep sigh. Is that enough? The bishop didn't answer.
He was simply rubbing his chin with his head lowered.
This seemed like a subconscious habit that came out while he was ruminating. He tilted his head left and right before turning to Sol Jihu.
My.
A faint smile seemed to be hanging on his face.
It looks like I owe you an apology.
He seemed strangely satisfied.
It wasn't that you didn't try to help. You simply couldn't. I understand now. I honestly wasn't thinking so highly of you before, but now that I know the full story.
I apologize. I am sincerely sorry.
The bishop continued.
If I may give an excuse, didn't you hear that I wanted to meet with you?
I did. I've been wanting to discuss the matter regarding Lady Seo Yuhui with Representative Sol for a few months now.
Since I would be taking a sizable loss, I had to make sure Representative Sol was someone I could trust. So that was why I asked so many interrogative questions. Loss?
Yes. Anyway, I've confirmed Representative Sol's sincerity.
Since there is no use apologizing with mere words, I will show my sincerity as well.
The bishop smiled and spoke.
Have you heard of Gorad Boga? Sol Jihu shook his head. It refers to the location in this world that was ruled by its first god after their birth.
It is a legend that has been passed down since the mythical era, long before the time of the Empire.
On Earth, this place would be similar to the legendary city of Atlantis or the City of God.
City of God.
As a land that was once ruled by a god, it naturally carries miraculous energy. To priests who use holy power rather than mana, this is the most ideal place.
Are you talking about areas like Mount Paleon's volcanic region?
Ah, the place Lady Seo Yuhui visits often to pray.
Yes, that is correct. It's great that you have an idea.
But the place I am talking about is incomparable to that place. The density of vital energy should be hundreds of times greater at the very least.
Sol Jihu's eyes widened.
Hundreds of times?
Think of it as a small achievement I made while Representative Sol was working hard." The bishop smiled thinly and then cleared his throat.
"Getting right to the point, I've found the place that is presumed to be Gorad Boga."
"No, I'm certain. I went there personally using the excuse of offering prayers."
The bishop glanced at Sol Jihu, who was clearly excited. "I've never seen anything like it."
It was like lumps of highly concentrated vital energy were scattered everywhere like ordinary rocks.
"It should be more than enough for Lady Seo Yuhui to fully recover." "Is that true?"
"Yes. But—" the bishop coughed.
"Before I tell you its location, I need you to promise me something."
"A promise? No worries.
It's not anything difficult." The corner of the bishop's mouth slowly curled up.
Please tell Lady Seo Yuhui this."
Then, his voice suddenly lowered. "That it was Representative Sol who found out about this place." Sol Jihu blinked at the unexpected request.
"Of course, she might wonder how you found this place. I will hand over all the details that you might need."
"Ah!" The more bewildered Sol Jihu looked, the thicker the bishop's smile got. "Why? Do I need to do that?"
"Well, it's fine even if you don't."
The bishop replied firmly as Sol Jihu raised a suspicion.
"It's just that the trouble we went through will have been for naught."
"Because Lady Seo Yuhui will refuse to go if you tell her the information came from me." "Pardon?"
"It's because I am someone who lost her trust. Lady Seo Yuhui will never give her trust to someone she has turned her back on once."
Sol Jihu stood in a fluster at the bishop's honest confession. Fu, don't be so surprised."
"Didn't you know this already?"
What kind of person I am and what relationship I have with Lady Seo Yuhui.
"Didn't Miss Foxy tell you all about it?"
Sol Jihu's complexion sank as the bishop hit the nail on the head. "That's right.
I am not a fan of Lady Seo Yuhui. In fact, you can even say that I hate her."
The bishop admitted. "But I am sincere in wanting to save her."
"I can only keep my position if that wench dies."
"If I was thinking something so foolish, I would have assassinated her rather than wasting my energy to find Gorad Boga." "Don't you think so?"
Sol Jihu's aura sharpened in an instant.
The bishop seemed to like this change in attitude as he showed a satisfied smile.
"People rarely walk by here.
Why don't we talk a little more comfortably?" The bishop clasped his hands behind his back and slowly circled around Sol Jihu with his clacking shoes.
"You must be curious why an ugly, power-hungry, old man like me is trying to save Lady Seo Yuhui, or if I am scheming to entrap the two of you. Clack. I will be open and straightforward.
It's simple. It is because I recently understood why Lady Seo Yuhui returned from her retirement and because I fully support the goal that she is trying to achieve."
Clack.
"To be honest, I didn't understand at first why someone without any desire suddenly came back and what she was trying to achieve."
Clack.
"That wasn't all. After going so far as to put a protective order on her residence in Scheherazade, she suddenly decided to move to Harem and look after a warrior of Gula who was a known irregular."
The questions I had only grew by the day. Clack. "But now, I finally understand why she did all those things." My eyes lit up and shot open. "Really? Ah!
Why didn't I notice this earlier?"
The clacking of his shoes stopped.
Before he noticed, the bishop was standing before Sol Jihu.
"She must have been longing for the past just like me.
The time when Baek Haiju, Seo Yuhui, and Sung Shi-hyun were active in paradise." That was truly an era of glory. Of course, they say that there is no flower that remains red for 10 days. But isn't it normal for flowers to bloom and wilt?
The bishop took another step towards Sol Jihu. 2 out of the 3 people from back then have reappeared in paradise.
While one has betrayed humanity, there is a man in front of me who surpasses Sung Shi-hyun.
Character. Strength. He is flawless in every aspect. Chilly laughter rang out. "It is time that the flower blooms again."
The return of the legend of paradise, the reappearance of the beholder of the divine vestige, and the coming of a new hero, the son of Gyula, all the conditions had been met. Once I realized this, I had to save Lady Seo Yuhui no matter what. After saying all this,
with this, I'm sure you've noticed my true intention. The bishop slowly reached out his hands toward Sol Jihu.
What will you do? He placed his hands on his shoulders and asked with a furtive voice. I babbled on, but it's simple, really. Don't
you want to save the woman you love?
Sol Jihu subconsciously took a deep breath.
The hands that were on his shoulders felt like crawling snakes. Don't you want to save the person who risked her life to save yours?
At the same time, a chill went down his spine. It was because he finally came face to face with the naked truth of earthlings who only chased after their own benefits.
It isn't difficult. All you have to do is reach out and grab onto the opportunity.
It is incomparably safer than something as absurd as infiltrating the parasite's territory. Sol Jihu bit down on his lower lip. He fell silent with a conflicted look. Then, he slowly said, Does a place like Gorad Boga really exist? Perhaps judging that the fish had taken the bait, the bishop tightened his grip unknowingly.
I may be worrying unnecessarily, but do not doubt Goddess Gyula.
The value of a place, where a god has directly appeared in the middle world, simply cannot be described.
It may be on par with a divine wish.
It is only natural that representative soul could not find out with contribution points.
He then added, but, I found out about this place through sheer luck.
With my own strength.
Sol Jihu, who was about to turn around,
stopped in the middle and shut his eyes.
His breathing gradually turned rough before, KDDK.
The sound of him gritting his teeth rang out.
Soon.
Where is this place?
A suppressed voice eked out. The bishop's burning gaze regained its original color. His eyes curled into a smile. It seems you and I are on the same page now.
That's right.
A person has to be flexible. That's the kind of man I like. Only then did he take his hands off Sol Jihu.
Haha. Actually, it takes some time to get to that place from Eva, so something unsavory might happen during travel. But, I have a way of taking care of that problem. The bishop raised his left hand and pulled out the ring on his finger. It was a ring with an emerald-colored gem. Anyone could tell at first glance that it was not an ordinary accessory.
This is a holy artifact I received when I became a level 6.
It carries a large amount of vital energy, so you won't have to worry about running out of holy power during travel. The bishop shook the ring a couple of times before taking out a transparent crystal from his pocket.
I will give you this as a token of our promise and call you later. I will see you then. He carefully placed the crystal on Sol Jihu's hand. Then, Representative Sol?
Let me be clear.
There is nothing that I want. He suddenly clutched Sol Jihu's hands and spoke. Please save Lady Seo Yuhui.
Then continue fighting the parasites like you always have been and triumph. That in and of itself will be of huge help to me.
Well, if this matter continues weighing on your mind, you can tell me the location of the buried offerings later. I am giving you my prized ring and location of Gorad Boga, so shouldn't I enjoy a snack or two as well? The bishop revealed a thick smile and then let go.
Then I will take my leave first.
He then took a few steps back before standing up straight. Do take care of me from now on, Sir Future Star of Gluttony and Gyula's preparatory apostle.
The bishop bowed politely at Sol Jihu and then left the room with a hearty laugh.
Asterisk. It was about 10 minutes after the bishop left that Sol Jihu turned around.
After standing like a stone statue for a long time, Sol Jihu slowly crossed the corridor.
Seo Yuhui wasn't inside the recovery room. She had apparently returned to Earth due to a problem with her body.
Sol Jihu left the temple with a stiff expression. During the entire walk home, His expression was dazed and his footsteps were without strength. But the moment he entered Valhalla, his attitude changed completely.
Color returned to his complexion, and his footsteps became light.
Hoo, a gift?
You didn't have to.
He even juggled the ring while humming joyfully.
But before he could enter through the front door, Sol Ji-hoo had to stop.
Kim Hana was staring at him fixedly at the entrance. Why are you looking at me like that?
Because you look like someone who picked up money from the ground on his way home. Hearing this, Sol Ji-hoo changed his attitude again. He returned to the enervated appearance he had when he left the temple.
What about now?
Like a male protagonist who joined hands with a devil to save the woman he loves but is still shocked by the whole thing. Sol Ji-hoo burst into laughter at Kim Hana's assessment.
That's problematic. Why?
I wanted to look like a man who would stop at nothing to save the woman he loves. Kim Hana chuckled.
How was it? Don't even mention it. I thought I was going to die.
Sol Ji-hoo heaved out a sigh and marveled. He kept asking one question after the other with some shitty excuses. He really has a talent for making people tired. I'll give him that. Thankfully, it didn't seem like he knew how divinity worked.
He's quite the snake, isn't he?
Kim Hana snickered.
That guy's pretty famous on Earth too.
He climbed up the social ladder while seeing all sorts of dirty things from a young age.
It's better to have him find out rather than putting on a poor performance.
Now that I've met him, I can tell exactly what you're talking about. He touched my shoulders, and it was like snakes were crawling all over me. Aww.
Anyway, how did it go?
Sol Ji-hoo shrugged and showed Kim Hana the crystal and the ring.
What's that ring?
He gave it to me as a token of our promise.
He said it's a holy artifact he received when he became a level 6.
He told me to give it to Yuhui Nuna. Oh ho. So he took a step back to confirm whether you were serious, but he's confident.
Kim Hana smiled in satisfaction. She sauntered up and patted Sol Ji-hoo's butt as if to praise him for performing so well in front of that snake-like, old man. Where do you think you're touching?
Sol Ji-hoo flinched and protested, but Kim Hana only snorted in response.
What do you think I'm doing?
I'm praising you. Good job. Go rest and ease up. Sol Ji-hoo looked at her dumbfoundedly before looking down.
Though covered by her H-line office skirt, he could see her well-shaped hips under her slender waist. Sol Ji-hoo reached out stealthily.
Tap, tap. Yeah, you did well too.
Kim Hana jumped.
Aw. Hey. Are you crazy?
Where do you think you're touching?
Ye who does not permit thy butt shall not covet another's butt. Pang. Sol Ji-hoo spoke solemnly before rushing up the stairs with ethereal shift.
Despite Kim Hana screaming from the lobby, he moved quickly.
Kim Hana's not bad either.
Recalling a certain evil butt, Sol Ji-hoo rubbed his hand and then paused as soon as he stepped into his office.
His grinning eyes quickly scanned the room.
..
He slowly closed the door and locked it before smiling toward the desk. You're here. It was then. Wong. With a short ringing sound, a faint barrier was cast around the room.
It was similar to the one Sol Ji-hoo saw at the temple.
How can I not come when the hero of paradise is calling me? A voice was heard from the room where only Sol Ji-hoo was standing. I wasn't sure what to think when I first got the message from Delphine.
That Valhalla's representative will call soon and that I should pick up the call in an isolated place.
The voice sounded a bit brusque.
Soon, a young man slowly appeared from the table in the center of the room. An indigo magician's robe, a thick book resembling a dictionary in his left hand, and a pair of emotionless pupils behind gold-rimmed glasses. And when you asked me to come to Valhalla in secret, I instantly thought, this man is about to start something.
Philip Muller appeared out of thin air and spoke as he quietly flipped through a page.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled.
If the Star of Avarice was visiting officially, Kim Hannah would have told him about it in advance. However, he had heard nothing of the sort from her. Because she didn't know Philip Muller would be visiting. "I knew you would be able to get in here without being found out. I almost got caught, actually."
Philip Muller spoke without taking his eyes off his book. You almost got caught?
Sol Jihu's eyes widened.
Since I've been here once before, it wasn't difficult to set the coordinates correctly.
But when I tried to teleport, mana flooded in from this building, trying to hinder my spell. I would have been found out if I was even a few seconds late. From the building. That means Yuri, was it? It should be her, one of the magician trio who's been hanging out with Delphine recently.
Anyway, she must have sensed something because she scattered her mana around every nook and cranny of the building.
Philip Muller smirked. What a cheeky girl. A magician, who's not even a high ranker, trying to compete against a unique ranker who's an apostle of God.
So something like that happened.
Maybe I should have let Miss Yuri know. No, it was unexpected for me too. And to be honest, it was fun. I don't know about you warriors, but we magicians have our own fights. Thanks to her, my blood started boiling after a long time. Philip Muller's voice carried a subtle pride.
It seemed he considered this fight a victory since he managed to teleport in without being discovered. Anyway, a magician of her caliber should have a different way of thinking than most people.
From what Delphine's told me, she's pursuing the limits of the path of mana. If given the chance, I'd love to meet and discuss theories with her. Given Philip Muller's personality, it was rare to see him show so much interest in someone. Sol Jihu's expression turned odd. Should I arrange a meeting between you two? I can lend a hand if you want. I'm trying to discuss theories, not romance. He refused firmly. I'd love to meet her as a magician, but she seems like a dangerous woman to be involved with as a man. You better be careful too. What's wrong with Miss Yuri?
She must have been annoyed that I didn't fall for the trap, so she started searching through the entire city like a crazy woman.
It really wasn't something to react so badly for. It was like she was chasing after me with a knife.
Philip murmured the last sentence.
Plus, I have a wife. If I want to live a long life, I have to be careful.
You're married? You didn't know?
My servant is my wife. We didn't register for marriage or anything,
but we've been living together for 5 years in paradise, so we're practically a married couple.
Philip Muller snorted as he pushed his glasses up. He looked like he didn't know why he had to explain all this.
Anyway, let's quit the small talk and cut to the chase.
Got it. Sol Jihu walked toward the desk. Knowing Philip Muller's personality, he started talking as soon as he sat down on the opposite side.
There are paradisians and earthlings within humanity's camp that are communicating with the parasites.
Philip Muller flinched. Sol Jihu crossed his legs and placed his interlocked fingers on his knee. I'd like to ask for Mr. Muller's opinion regarding this matter. Only now did Philip Muller take his eyes off his book.
He stared at Sol Jihu with a subdued gaze.
I'm not sure why you're asking me all of a sudden, but… He stared for some time before slowly retorting. I'll give my answer first. I don't think there are traitors within humanity's camp. Sol Jihu widened his eyes at the unexpected response. I thought for sure that you'd agree.
Can I ask why you think so?
I thought so too originally with 90% certainty. But I changed my mind after the Arden Valley War.
Think about the condition that Undying Diligence put forth after he and the parasite army arrived at the valley.
Sol Jihu slowly searched through his memories.
It was something that happened almost 10 years ago, but the memory quickly came back with how shocking it was.
Amongst you should be a human who recently began to make a name for himself. If you hand over that person, we will go back quietly.
I shall promise with my name.
Once Sol Jihu shut his mouth,
Philip Muller started talking again.
Undying Diligence was talking about you.
The Valley War, the Delphinion Laboratory incident, the banquet. You were the only one who started making a name for himself back then.
Sol Jihu nodded his head,
and Philip Muller continued. The thing to note is that Undying Diligence did not know your name. It's hard to believe the parasites didn't care when they went so far as to bring 3 of their armies to battle, and it also doesn't make sense that they would say something like that if they already knew.
It's not like it was difficult to distinguish you, so why didn't they know? Sol Jihu understood what Philip Muller was getting at. If there were traitors amidst humanity's camp, there was no way the parasites wouldn't have known this information. After all, with how easy it was to characterize him, the traitors would have revealed his name.
So it's highly likely that there were no traitors at the time that were directly communicating with the parasites.
But
at that moment, Philip Muller came in with a huge but. Whether it be the past or present, I do believe there are Earthlings or Paradisians that are trying to defect to the parasites. This, I'm sure of. Meaning, there were people who were willing to betray humanity if given the opportunity. The immature, young Sol Jihu wouldn't have understood why. He would have angrily yelled asking how Earthlings could do something that directly went against their duty.
But he was different now. Sol Jihu easily acknowledged what Philip Muller said and smiled. I guess there are people trying to flatter the winning side no matter where you go. People trying to flatter the winning side.
That's a good way to put it. Philip Muller laughed blandly before turning serious again. The problem is that Paradise isn't a sporting event that you pay a fee to enter. Yes. It's a death match that doesn't stop until one side perishes completely.
Exactly. To be honest, most Earthlings are probably hoping the status quo continues. Parasites leaving humanity alone and only fighting with the Federation, and the Federation barely hanging on. Because only then would Paradise continue to need Earthlings. But there is no way this status quo will go on forever. In fact, if it wasn't for you, it would have changed long ago. Arden Valley would have been taken over. Harem, which serves as the outpost of humanity, would have been conquered by mass-produced mutant orcs. And Eva would probably be hanging on by a thread. Humanity would have been counting down to their doom.
Philip Muller said after a short pause.
Thankfully, things aren't so bad right now.
But, in the end, Earthlings will have to make a decision one day.
To fight, to escape to Earth, or
jump to the parasite side and continue their activities in Paradise. As Sol Jihu finished the sentence, Philip Muller nodded his head.
He then crossed his arms as if he said everything he had to say. Now, it was time to reveal the reason he asked. Sol Jihu organized his thoughts before starting. When I moved from Harem to Eva, I made 3 vows. Sol Jihu's voice was low and calm. The first was to clean up the deeply rooted corruption inside Eva.
The second was to improve humanity's relationship with the Federation.
And the third was to change humanity.
Philip Muller listened to Sol Jihu quietly. At present, I can confidently say the first and second goals have been met.
But I haven't achieved the third goal yet.
To tell you the truth, at first, I thought things would change if I just worked hard to set an example for others. But that was the wrong expectation to have. Humanity has never had a proper fight with the parasites, yet they were more afraid than they needed to be. This perception hasn't changed even though we won the last battle.
It can't be helped.
It's true that the parasites are a powerful enemy. Philip Muller sighed. It's true that we won the last battle as you said, but anyone with some thought would know not to be so optimistic about the future course of the war.
In fact, they would be pessimistic. I think so too.
We could only push them back in Tiggle Fortress where we had an overwhelming advantage.
And something like that won't happen ever again.
The people looking for an opportunity to defect probably don't think well of you. Because the parasites will pay more attention to humanity with how much you've busted them up.
That's the point. Sol Jihu's voice grew slightly louder. As you said, Earthlings will have to make a decision one day. That day may not have come yet,
but I'm sure everyone feels that it's closer than ever before.
And? So wouldn't there be more antsy traders as well? Philip Muller furrowed his brows like he didn't understand. What are you trying to get at? Going back a little bit. Sol Jihu cleared his throat, thinking that a more detailed explanation was needed. The parasite queen has left humanity alone all this time.
Compared to how they've dealt with the Federation, they've practically been ignoring humanity.
But if you take a closer look, that isn't necessarily the case. Sol Jihu stretched out his arm. Quack!
A pile of records flew into his hand.
Master Ian personally compiled these records.
Try giving them a read.
Sol Jihu handed the pile over.
Soon, Philip Muller's eyes slowly widened as he flipped through the pages.
He could see many familiar names. Alzara, Alvaro Scrokey,
Eleanor Luna, Joshua Claflin.
They were all Earthlings who were once renowned in paradise.
The important thing was that they were no longer in paradise.
Of course, I'm sure some of those incidents were caused by the conflict between Earthlings. But
there are incidents that the parasites had a hand in.
Yes. And if you focus on that, you'll see something in common that's very interesting.
Sol Jihu spoke. The parasite queen hasn't been ignoring humanity.
She understood Earthlings better than anyone else, and she acted accordingly, throwing hints to incite certain situations. Explain. Could it be that there was no one more outstanding than me among the countless Earthlings that came to paradise? No, I don't think so. But the problem is this. Whenever a hero appears and tries to do something, the parasite queen would appear. And she quickly dispatched the hero.
Whether it be killing them like with Joshua Claflin, corrupting them and forcing them to defect like with Marika Larissa, or coaxing them to join like with Sung Shi-hyun.
Right, the parasites hadn't neglected humanity. It wasn't that the first-ranked didn't care about the third-ranked.
Rather, they simply devised a situation so that they didn't need to care. The parasites had carefully controlled the situation so that they would interfere only when it was absolutely necessary.
I understand what you're saying. Philip Muller asked calmly.
But what did you mean by the parasite queen throwing hints?
As I said,
the parasite queen understands Earthlings well. Sol Jihu spoke clearly.
Let's try to put ourselves in their shoes. Whose shoes?
The ones who are happy to defect to the parasite's side given the chance but haven't entered the parasite queen's eyes. Sol Jihu continued. The parasite queen is extremely aloof and arrogant.
Even high rankers might not necessarily catch her attention.
The day to make a decision was coming closer by the minute.
Humanity could no longer wish for things to stay the same. In this situation when humanity might be the next target of the parasites.
The would-be traders have been forced into a spot where they need to quickly prove their worth to the parasite queen.
Philip Muller's eyes narrowed.
And what would be the best way for them to prove their worth? His expression was ambiguous, like he was on the verge of fully grasping the big picture.
Sol Jihu threw another hint.
For example, what if there's a human who's become an eyesore to the parasites, but the Federation and humanity puts him on a high pedestal and treats him as a hero? But if you take a closer look at the things he's done, he's only a lucky high ranker who's relied on miracles to seemingly get through perilous situations?
Philip Muller's eyes finally widened like giant bells.
Don't tell me. As the other side finally seemed to have gotten a grip on the situation, Sol Jihu slowly got up from his seat.
That's why I called you, Mr. Muller. I wanted to take this opportunity and make an offer. He walked around the table in a relaxed manner, and, by any chance, he finally revealed the reason he called him here today.
Do you want to make a movie with me?
A movie, you say? Philip Muller muttered dazedly.
Though it might seem random, he wasn't so foolish as to not understand the hidden meaning. You want me to appear in it?
No.
Yuhui Nuna and I will be the leading actors, and I already have the other main cast in mind.
Actually, he came to me personally, begging to participate in the movie.
Sol Ji-hoo stopped and placed his hand over his mouth.
Looking at the giggling Sol Ji-hoo, Philip Muller swallowed his saliva, feeling unfamiliar with this side of him.
Then what do you need me for?
I'd like you to be the director. The cinematographer, to be precise. I appreciate you seeing me in such high regard, but I'm a very expensive man. Philip Muller inhaled unwittingly.
Don't worry.
The movie will rake in huge profits. It'll be our joint production.
How much are you expecting?
Well.
Sol Ji-hoo winked. If cleaning up the would-be traitors within humanity goes well, I plan to make a sequel right away. The expected profit for that, I guess, is the change within humanity.
Philip Muller closed his eyes. Aren't you being overly ambitious with that estimation?
Am I? It's so high that it seems unrealistic. Despite saying this, Philip Muller's expression was a sight to behold.
The corners of his eyes were twitching, and his lips were trembling. It was easy to see how excited he was. Sol Ji-hoo expected this reaction. After all, what was I supposed to do when we were attacked from both the inside and outside?
Didn't I warn you in advance?
I thought they were all wiped out. Who would have known that so many people would only be the tip of the iceberg? You didn't even bother listening when the former star of avarice yelled it at you, word by word. Serves you right.
When he saw Yun Seahui with the 9 eyes, the conversation she had with his past self showed that Philip Muller was interested in this problem.
Regarding how realistic it is, why don't you decide after seeing the script?
Sol Ji-hoo shrugged.
Of course.
Cinematographer?
If this movie is worth investing in, I don't see why not.
Philip Muller knew too.
Sol Ji-hoo said the other main cast came to find him personally.
This meant that all of this wasn't just a guess and that the opposing side had made a move.
If so, there really couldn't be a better opportunity to strike.
Of course, Philip Muller naturally had some doubts, but the man in front of him was a famous leading actor who had already given multiple successful hits. The success of this movie was practically guaranteed.
Ah! Philip Muller opened his eyes after collecting his breath.
Before speaking about any investment, there's something I'd like to know as the potential cinematographer.
He asked as if he just thought of this. What genre will this movie be?
Action? Thriller? Dramatic twists?
Sol Ji-hoo stopped walking and blinked a couple of times.
Since we'll be mixing in plenty of bait and deception. After a short deliberation, he put his hands into his pockets and grinned.
Mockumentary. Let's go with a mockumentary. Sol Ji-hoo and Philip Muller stayed up all night talking.
They mostly took turns talking, but sometimes intense discussions erupted between the two and they both raised their voices in heated arguments. The door was shut tightly, of course, and the isolating barrier set up by Philip Muller prevented all sound from coming in or going out. The turbulent atmosphere that filled the room gradually settled down as the darkness of the night began to fade.
We should stop here for today. Philip Muller's voice was thin with fatigue from staying up all night.
It's meaningless to go on any further.
You're as stubborn as a mule. What a coincidence. I was just thinking the same thing. It's the director who makes the movie. I wish you wouldn't interfere with my directorial rights, such as the right to decide the content of the shoot, the right to decide which camera angles are the best, etc. There are certain things that I just can't give up as an actor. I'm the lead, after all. Damn it. If you're an actor, you should just focus on acting and nothing else. I doubt a movie made by a director who gets pushed around by the actors would be any good. Rebuked Philip Muller as he gathered books from the table and stood up. I doubt a movie made without the main actor would be any good. Sol Ji-hoo retorted. Philip Muller shook his head side to side, clearly fed up with this discussion. Will you at least reconsider the ending? I'll get started right away once I get back. I'll think about it. I'll contact you when the time comes. Sol Ji-hoo rubbed his eyes and yawned. When he opened his eyes again, Philip Muller was gone. He must have used teleport,
Sol Jihu got up and stood beside the window with morning sunlight pouring over him.
What he liked most about fishing was the weight.
The skeptical fish that hadn't even looked twice at the bait was finally beginning to show interest.
The fish was exploring, occasionally giving the lure a quick jerk. If they pulled too early, it would run away. They had to wait for the perfect moment. Let's not be hasty.
Sol Jihu let out a small sigh.
Then he walked over to his bed and sunk down on it. Slowly, he closed his eyes. Asterisk.
After his meeting with the bishop, Sol Jihu refrained from going out. He even stopped wandering around the city to look for offerings.
He waited patiently as he had promised himself. Meanwhile, the bishop reached out to him.
He told Sol Jihu to prepare for an expedition and asked if he could tell him where Rothshir's offerings were. Because the bishop had given him the valuable holy artifact, Sol Jihu did not hesitate to tell him the location of the offerings.
But of course, he feigned reluctance in front of the bishop. He also asked the members of Valhalla not to speak about his plan. Other than that, he spent much of his time doing various things. For example, sorry. Sol Jihu smacked his lips as he watched Cho-hong run frantically towards him. This was what he called the anti-parasite queen preparation project. His first student, Phi Sora, had completed the entire curriculum and was on her way to graduating soon. She mastered both 1,000-ton pushing strength and floral substitution. Now it was up to her to combine those two skills and achieve grand cosmic shift. Phi Sora was supposed to teach Cho-hong, but she herself was still learning, and because Sol Jihu had a lot of time on his hands. Cho-hong became Sol Jihu's second student. After all, she was one of his oldest comrades and a level 6, too. However, as soon as he started teaching, Sol Jihu found that the reality wasn't as satisfying as he had anticipated. He finally realized what Black Sol Jihu must have felt when he was teaching him. Phi Sora was the epitome of a model student. She was always on time and sometimes even asked for extended lessons. She studied hard and always bombarded Sol Jihu with questions to the point where he was almost afraid. He could see that she was getting better every day. It wasn't like Cho-hong lacked enthusiasm. She seemed really glad when Sol Jihu first volunteered to teach her. But her determination was weak. Today, because she didn't show up at the promised hour, Sol Jihu went to look for her. He found her in her room, still sleeping. You know how Yi Sung-jin came back yesterday. I went out with Team 1 to celebrate and ended up drinking way too much. But why would you go out with Team 1? Come on, why not? Cho-hong grinned. Hey, by the way, I've noticed this for some time, but aren't we really famous now? Sol Jihu let out a small sigh. It was commendable that Cho-hong never skipped lessons, but she always spent half of her class time chatting away. At this point, he couldn't even tell whether she had come to learn or to chat. A bunch of people recognized us at the pub yesterday. They asked us about the Spirit Realm expedition. They were still curious, even though the expedition happened 10 months ago. Sol Jihu's eyes suddenly gleamed. And? So we told them. Why shouldn't we? The climax of the story was when Gyo shot the world tree. They kept asking us if that really happened. You should have seen Gyo's face. It was so red. He said it was because of the alcohol, but I doubt it. Quote. Anyway, they were so impressed that they offered to pay for our drinks. So I drank to my heart's content. Cho-hong cackled merrily. Sol Jihu asked with a smile. You didn't make a mistake, did you? Mistake? Like maybe you told them what you shouldn't tell them. Aw, you mean that thing you warned us about? Don't worry. I kept my mouth shut the whole time because I knew I'd make a mistake somewhere down the line. Good job. But is the lying really necessary? Suddenly, Cho-hong leered at Sol Jihu. Why can't we just tell them what really happened? I understand Raging Temperance's divinity, but why lie about Moirai's souvenir, too? Trust me, I have a plan.
What kind of plan? Just be honest.
You're making us lie to make yourself look cool, right?
Because it sounds cooler if you say you used Moirai's souvenir to defeat him.
Do you really think I care about looking cool? Sol Jihu gave a soft chuckle. Maybe not before, but you've changed. Cho Hong snorted.
Because now everyone practically reveres you, calling you a hero and a legend.
Never mind. What would a sparrow know about a phoenix's plan?
What?
Are you calling me a sparrow? If you're not, prove it. It took Miss Phi Sora only 1 day to master the basics. Fine.
Then I'll master both skills by the end of the day.
Yeah, right.
Sol Jihu thought to himself before moving on to the explanation.
Listen up. The basis of 1,000-ton pushing strength is.
Cho Hong listened attentively, her eyes beaming with enthusiasm.
But of course, that didn't last long. Cho Hong. Your mana is too rough. Try moving it gently. I am moving it gently. Now you're too rigid.
Remember the expression, softness overcomes hardness. I told you, think of inertia or a lever. What's that? What?
Meanwhile, Maria slowly rose from a crouch in the garden. She held more than a handful of weeds in her gloved hands. Not long ago, Maria signed a new contract with Valhalla's administrator and became Valhalla's garden manager. Kim Hannah had offered her a pretty decent salary. God, my back hurts. She had been up since early in the morning, pulling weeds, watering the garden, and feeding holy power to the plants. Her back ached from overwork. Let's see. That's enough for the garden, and now I only have the backyard left. She hurried her steps, massaging her waist as she walked. But then she stopped when she heard a series of shouts coming from the backyard. Why are you yelling at me? So what if I don't know? When did I yell at you? You did. Just now. Oh. I can't even. Sol Jihu and Cho Hong were arguing there. Maria clicked her tongue. Those two, they're always fighting these days. Don't worry about them. Suddenly, she heard a voice. Maria looked back in a startle. Eun Yuri was watching the pair from the first-floor terrace. That's a common sight in Korea. She muttered, putting a straw in her cup. Maria frowned. It's a common sight? I've seen it many times at my house. At your house? Yes. Eun Yuri nodded and closed her lips around the straw. When my dad was teaching my mom how to drive. She then sucked her drink through the straw. Asterisk. At around the same time. You've been quite busy lately. The bishop and a man sat facing each other in a dark room. You asked me to meet you here today. Does that mean you made progress? I wouldn't call it progress, but I can now say with confidence that the confirmation step has been completed. The bishop answered with a faint smile. I talked to him at the temple. He seemed to be telling the truth. Is that so? Yes. So I've confirmed that the stone bridge does exist, but that wasn't enough to bring me peace of mind. I sent some men to knock on various parts of the bridge for a more thorough inspection. The bishop coughed lightly. They spoke to the members of Valhalla at a pub. The whole story falls in place. How can we be sure that they're not lying altogether? You're right, that is a concern. But he can't lie to us about the location of Rothshir's offerings. Yes, but Sol Jihu told the bishop that he offered contribution points to the goddess to find out where the offerings were buried. It was easy to determine whether he lied or not. If the offerings were really buried there, he told the truth. Otherwise, he lied. He told the truth. What? The man raised his head in a flash. I sent someone trustworthy to check on his claim. He found a huge amount of offerings buried at the site. I saw them with my own eyes through a communication crystal. In both quality and quantity, they're enough to cure Lady Seo Yuhui. Wait a minute. Didn't you say that area was within the parasite's domain? The bishop smiled. Don't tell me you've succeeded in the expedition? Please calm down. I'll explain.
The bishop raised both his hands in the air.
I'm asking just to be sure. Do you really believe that Gorad Boga exists?
A legend is but a legend. How do you expect me to find a mythical site that existed long before the time of the empire? A corner of the bishop's mouth slanted upwards.
It was for a different purpose that I went on the expedition at the time.
A different purpose? The man's eyes narrowed. Don't tell me you.
Please, don't get ahead of yourself. Did you know that some parasites have a sense of self?
Get to the point.
I hope you won't misunderstand me when I say that the site believed to be Gorad Boga was near the parasite's border and that I encountered a couple of parasites while inspecting the area. I won without much difficulty, of course, since I'm a level 6 bishop.
However, considering the efficiency of the parasite's communication, I had no choice but to retreat quickly before more of them came as reinforcements. But as I was about to leave, I suddenly thought of Sung Shihyun. Sung Shihyun?
His personality wasn't exactly charming, but he was once called a hero. You see, he and I were on pretty good terms. I couldn't help but worry about the safety of my old friend. The bishop continued with a snicker. I was worried about how he was doing, and curious if he had any intention of coming back. So I left a communication crystal and a letter where the battle took place. Shame on me for being too attached, Ha!
The bishop's barefaced impudence forced a peal of laughter out of the man.
A few days later, I revisited the site. Everything was the same, except, the communication crystal and the letter were gone. Ha! So that's how you confirmed the offerings.
The man exclaimed and shook his head.
You always emphasized the importance of taking caution.
You know what they say. It's always the quiet ones.
Please don't tease me.
This time, no matter what happens, we'll certainly cross the line.
And once we cross the line, we must not look back. The man drew a breath and then asked, What did Sung Shihyun say? He asked if we could buy some time, preferably 3 to 4 months.
He said that the parasite queen has been asleep ever since the war ended and that he and the other army commanders are still recovering from their injuries.
That sounds reasonable to me.
The Valhalla forces are quite powerful.
I declined.
Sung Shihyun doesn't have the full picture. He was dismayed when I told him that Valhalla would take extreme measures because Lady Seo Yuhui is in a dire state and that the parasites should strike before that happens. But why? Did you forget our goal? The bishop said in a secretive whisper. As much as we need their help, we can't let them run our show. We have to make sure the queen recognizes our worth.
So you say. But in the end, you're just being greedy. Hoo-hoo. Perhaps, but we need all we can get.
Considering the state Lady Seo Yuhui is in, the awakening skill used to kill Undying Diligence must have been sealed. Also, he must have used quite an amount of contribution points to find the spot where the offerings were buried. This means his level can't be any higher than 6. Don't tell me you can't beat a warrior who's just reached level 6.
Well, that shouldn't be too hard. The man nodded his head.
The bishop's smile broadened.
I've prepared a sumptuous meal for you. I hope you enjoy it.
Does that mean I can proceed?
I'll contact the Valhalla representative soon. I understand. I'll get ready. I hope you do. The bishop slowly got up from his chair. He clasped his hands behind his back and stared down at the man. We must seize this opportunity. I believe in you, of course. If everything goes as planned, you'll receive a great reward for your labor. Please look forward to it.
With quiet laughter, the bishop exited the room, already convinced that he would become the leader of a new era.
The man sat alone in the dark and laughed scornfully.
The day after his fight with Chohong, Sol Jihu received a call from the bishop. The bishop informed him of the location of Gorad Boga and handed him all the data he had collected regarding the site. He said he wrote down in his report the whole process of how he had found the site and asked Sol Jihu to persuade Seo Yuhui. He also warned Sol Jihu to prepare a powerful expedition team in case of a contingency, as Gorad Boga was near the parasite's border.
Sol Jihu immediately began his preparations.
He contacted Philip Muller and talked to Phi Sora and Kazuki privately. And he reached Seo Yuhui through Baek Haiju.
Seo Yuhui arrived in Paradise the following day.
The level of detail of the bishop's report impressed Sol Jihu, but he didn't need it to persuade Seo Yuhui.
"Nuna, will you go out on a date with me?"
"Oh my, a date? What kind of date?"
"Let's go fishing."
"How about it?"
"Sounds fun. I'll go." That was all it took.
After all the preparations were made, Sol Jihu finally stopped by the temple storage to pick up the divine elixirs in Harmonia Magic Square. That very day, he left Eva in a carriage with his team members. The final war to determine the future of Paradise was drawing near.
Not a single cloud was visible in the clear, quiet morning sky, but by the time afternoon rolled around, dark clouds rolled in and heavy rain began pouring down.
As the wheels of the carriage bounced up and down on the rough terrain of the vast field, they left a long track in the mud.
It was quiet inside the carriage. A total of 4 people sat inside.
There were 5 members in total, counting Hoshino Urara, who was sitting on the carriage roof.
Yuri was dazedly staring into the air, moving her fingers nimbly as if playing on an invisible piano.
Someone who did not know her might think this is strange, but Cho-hong knew that she was a magician and didn't think too much of it. In fact, her indifferent gaze was fixed on another person across from her, a young man sitting in the corner of the carriage and a woman using the young man's thigh as a pillow.
They were Sol Jihu and Seo Yuhui.
As a sweet humming voice rang out, Sol Jihu lowered his head and looked down. "You're not going to sleep?"
I was going to, but I can't sleep for some reason."
"Why, is it uncomfortable?"
"No, not at all."
"Then can I stay like this a little bit longer?"
"My neck is so comfy right now." "Sure. And try to catch some sleep."
"I know you're not feeling well." Sol Jihu carefully placed his hand on Seo Yuhui's eyes. And as the large, warm hand covered half of Seo Yuhui's face, a pleasant smile bloomed on her face.
"Owing tilde I can't see tilde." It was clear to anyone watching that Seo Yuhui was squirming in happiness. Cho-hong furrowed her brows. The way she rolled her head left and right and savored Sol Jihu's thigh was unsightly, to say the least.
"Noonam, are you sure you're sick?"
In the end, she asked openly.
"Yes."
I'm fine right now because of this." Seo Yuhui raised her left hand with her eyes still closed.
The emerald ring on her finger shone brightly, flaunting its beauty.
Cho-hong leaned forward to take a closer look.
"What's that? A ring?"
"Yes." Seo Yuhui spread her fingers out.
"Jihu gave it to me tilde."
She seemed to be boasting.
The way she waved her hand, it was like she was showing it off for everyone to see. "He said it was a gift and personally put it on my finger."
For the record, the ring was on her left ring finger. Yuri glanced at Seo Yuhui.
She then looked down at the ring on her own left ring finger before sighing and shaking her head. "So what is it?" "It's an artifact that holds a large amount of holy power."
Sol Jihu replied when Cho-hong asked with an unsure expression.
"The bishop received it from Luxuria Nim when he became a level 6. Yuhui Nuna might run out of holy power on the way, right? This ring takes care of that problem."
"There should be no problem for at least 10 days. "Aha, so that's why." Cho-hong nodded her head before doing a double take. She glared at Sol Jihu and then turned away with a snort. She seemed to be saying, "Who the heck asked you?"
Sol Jihu chuckled.
It seemed Cho-hong hadn't forgotten about the argument they had a few days ago while training.
As Sol Jihu stared at Cho-hong, the corner of his mouth curled up stealthily.
His expression seemed to say he just thought of something good. "Oh no!" Clunk! At that moment, along with a sharp scream, the carriage door shot open. A woman drenched with rain swooped inside like a nimble gymnast. It was Hoshino Urara. "The coachman said you'll have to stop the carriage soon." Seo Yuhui shot up. Chohong grabbed the thorn of steel, and Un Yuri began to chant a spell. When Sol Jihu picked up the spear of purity, Hoshino Urara looked around the carriage and then nodded. "He said we'd have to set up camp earlier than expected because the Horus got tired from running in the rain." A silence descended. "You guys got that?" Hoshino Urara placed her hands on her waist and strutted out her chest. Soon, Chohong's fierce kick ensued. Quack! Hoshino Urara was sent flying out of the carriage with a squeal of a dying pig. "That crazy bitch! Hey, close the door!" Chohong huffed. Seo Yuhui went back to lying on Sol Jihu's thigh, and Un Yuri closed the door shut. "Yuong! I'm sorry. Don't leave me behind." They could hear Hoshino Urara chasing after them while screaming loudly. Asterisk. As the raindrops got thicker, the carriage came to a complete halt. They were supposed to arrive at their destination either today or tomorrow, but they fell behind in schedule due to the sudden, heavy downpour. Valhalla's main team set up camp and took care of dinner with Sol Jihu's ramen. As this was Un Yuri's first expedition, Sol Jihu handed her something that he specially prepared for her. Un Yuri looked down at a pair of silver chopsticks and a glass cup. Seeing how everyone else had wooden chopsticks and paper cups, she scurried up to Sol Jihu and angrily threw the silver chopsticks and glass cup on the ground. By the time dinner ended, Hoshino Urara arrived at the campsite, panting. After watching her lick every drop of soup from the pot like a starving dog, the team members gathered inside the tent and set up their sleeping bags. Sol Jihu laid down on the sleeping bag that Un Yuri prepared for him and fell into thought. I wonder how they justified this matter. A fundamental question popped up in his head as he rummaged through his thoughts. But it wasn't really a problem. It was clear that the traitors were making a move, and he had made preparations against it. Thanks to Seo Yuhui, he could be a step ahead of them and react accordingly. Still, aren't things going a bit too smoothly? If Seo Yuhui didn't prepare such a well-timed trap, then Sol Jihu really might have fallen for the traitor's tricks despite the future gauging 9 eyes. That was how scrupulous the bishop acted. He hid lies within truths. However, Seo Yuhui saw through his lies perfectly. Not only that, but she also predicted his every movement. Almost as if she knew the bishop would do this. Like she's experienced everything once before. Of course, Seo Yuhui was an earthling who had been active in paradise for a long time, so it was only natural that she knew more about its politics than him. It wasn't so strange thinking about it this way, but still. If I go to the temple and ask if I can spend contribution points to see the dream again, would Gyula Nim agree? As he tossed and turned in deep thought, he suddenly caught sight of someone. It was the person who hadn't said a word to him ever since they left Eva. Sol Jihu wiggled up and laid down next to her. Chohong moved away without saying anything. To the opposite side. Sol Jihu chuckled blandly before rolling to her side once more. Chohong. He whispered her name, but no reply came back. But once he lifted his leg and placed it on her. Move it. She reacted immediately. Ah, so comfortable. I told you to move it. Ehem. Sol Jihu coughed sternly. Is that any way to talk to your dear husband? Are you crazy? Chohong snorted with her back facing Sol Jihu. Husband, my ass. If you don't move your leg before I count down from 3, I'll break your leg. 3. I'll return those words to you. You'll regret it if you don't face me before I do the same. 2. Geez, are you Hugo? Sulking just because I was a little strict.
1. Did I say anything wrong?
You have to focus when you're learning. Were you that hurt that I asked if you were coming to the training simply to play with me? Alright, you're dead. Nuna.
Sol Jihu shouted. Seo Yuhui, who was sitting next to Un Yuri and learning yoga poses that were good for the body, turned in a startle.
I have something to ask.
How do vows work in paradise when a priest swears on their god's name?
Chohong flinched. She could clearly feel pressure from the leg that was placed on her body. When a priest swears on their god's name?
That's not something they do so easily.
Not priests, at least.
Really?
Yep.
Priests have the closest relationship to their gods among the 4 basic classes, so a vow made on their god's name places a heavy restriction on them that rivals an oath. That's why priests with even a little thought would never make vows on their god's name.
Meaning, Chohong was completely thoughtless.
Sol Jihu grinned. What if they signed a contract?
It was an informal one though.
Then they'd really have no way out. But why are you asking all of a sudden?
Seo Yuhui asked while doing a butterfly stretch.
Sol Jihu stared at Chohong with a snobbish look.
3, 2, 1. Agu. Where did I put that contract again?
Quote.
Well, I guess you don't need to call me dear husband. Darling tilde Opa tilde Master tilde. Chohong shook in her sleeping bag.
Then, she slowly turned around and faced Sol Jihu. Her face had reddened inside the sleeping bag and was turning purple in rage.
You're still on about that. I have a good memory. You better respect me because I still have the periodic table of elements memorized. Sol Jihu snickered before putting his other leg on top of her. Ow! How comfy. Chohong pillow is the best.
Why, you're so shameless.
Be quiet, pillow. Also, please take good care of me tonight.
Watching this, Seo Yuhui could only tilt her head, not knowing that Chohong had once made a bet on Kim Hannah and herself coming to Valhalla. She stared at the duo before excusing herself from Un Yuri's yoga class and getting up. Jihu, don't do that.
Huh? Aw, I'm just fooling around. Still, Miss Chohong hates it. Take your legs off, okay?
If you really have to, put your legs on this Nuna later.
Arg, it's fine. Chohong suddenly shouted. It's not like this is the first time he's doing this. I'll just live with it. But. Plus, you're sick.
Just go to sleep in peace away from this bastard.
No, you see, my life force is inside Jihu's body.
Suddenly, the conversation took a weird turn. The 2 women bickered for a while before finally compromising.
Seo Yuhui would have Sol Jihu's upper body, and Chohong would have his lower body.
Suddenly having his face in Seo Yuhui's embrace and his legs on top of Chohong, Sol Jihu blinked rapidly.
But since it was comfy, he decided to be satisfied with how things turned out and went to sleep. That night,
Sol Jihu had a dream.
He was alone on a boat with Seo Yuhui, riding on the calm waves of a beautiful sea that was scintillating under the glow of the setting sun.
He seemed to be lying down on the boat, and Seo Yuhui looked happy with him in her arms.
It's finally just the 2 of us. It was undoubtedly a peaceful dream. My little rabbit. But for some reason, a chill went down his spine. Run away! Hurry!
Oh! Black Rabbit is here too.
Black Sol Jihu suddenly appeared out of nowhere and ran away with him.
White Rabbit tilde Black Rabbit tilde.
When he subconsciously opened his eyes in the middle of the night, he found himself soaked in sweat from head to toe. Asterisk. The carriage ran for another 4 days before coming to a stop. Where they got off was the start of a mountain range that was beyond Harem and past the Forest of Denial. As Haremark's surrounding region had stabilized in recent days, the range of area that was deemed safe for travel had increased. Valhalla's main team started their march with Hoshino Urara as the header. They were heading toward the direction of the former Delphinian Duchy.
The march went without a hitch as Hoshino Urara was a unique rancor archer and Chohong had taken this route before when she went to rescue Sol Jihu, who was trapped in the laboratory.
Perhaps because they were in a mountain, night came rather quickly.
Valhalla's main team marched for almost an entire day before arriving at their destination. Because the bishop gave them a detailed roadmap, it wasn't hard to find the place.
There was just one problem.
Huh? This is that Gorad Boga place?
Chohong frowned as she looked around her surroundings. All she could see was a dense forest filled with trees and overgrown bushes.
She couldn't see anything like a trace of a city that was once ruled by a god after his birth. If anything, the darkness of the forest gave off a bleak, creepy feeling. What's up with this place?
For huge stone Rocky Mountain and Mount Paleom,
it was easy to see vital energy in the atmosphere.
We're talking about a myth from thousands of years ago. They say even mountains and rivers change in 10 years. It's not that surprising for this place to look like this.
But still.
Chohong smacked her lips.
Seo Yuhui also tilted her head.
What do you think, Nunam?
Can you feel anything?
I do feel holy power, but I'm not so sure.
Oh, you do?
Then maybe Sol's found the right place. It's just a little strange.
Seo Yuhui continued in a doubtful tone.
I can feel small clusters here and there, but they're not connected. There aren't that many, and they're far apart. Moreover, they're clusters of holy power, not vital energy.
Holy power? What do you mean?
Priests convert vital energy into holy power by praying in areas of high vital energy concentration.
But this is refined holy power.
I've never heard of a place like this existing. Chohong scratched her head. Sol Jihu met Seo Yuhui's eyes. The two of them nodded their heads slightly at the same time.
But Nuna, there's still holy power here, right?
Yeah, but…
Then why don't you try praying here?
I'll take a look around in the meanwhile. Sol Jihu opened up a straw mat. Seo Yuhui carefully kneeled down, closed her eyes, and locked her hands together in prayer. Chohong, set up camp next to Nuna.
Miss Hoshino Urara, be on the lookout for anything suspicious.
Miss Un Yuri, follow me. Sol Jihu started walking right away.
He took a dozen or so steps before suddenly stopping and kneeling down.
Un Yuri, who was following him while looking around, jumped in a startle. Whoosh!
Terrifying energy that could not be described with words erupted from Sol Jihu's body.
She could not feel even the slightest impurity from this mana.
But what surprised Un Yuri even more was that the boundless energy split into thousands of thin threads and spread out in all directions. If Russell saw this, she would undoubtedly exclaim, "What a beautiful application of mana."
Meanwhile, Sol Jihu's eyes waned as he stared fixedly at the ground.
Oh! A chuckle escaped his mouth before he rummaged through his pocket and then placed his hand on the ground.
He tapped the muddy earth and then got up. Miss Un Yuri.
Yes.
You saw me moving my mana just now, right? Yes.
Can you do the same thing?
Un Yuri tilted her head at the sudden question. I'm not sure. I'd have to try.
What about splitting into a few dozen strands and sending them in one direction?
I should be able to do that. Great. Then remember the spots where I'm stopping. With that, Sol Jihu started walking again. Un Yuri stared fixedly at the spot Sol Jihu had been standing in before chasing after him with light steps. Kneeling down, rummaging through his pocket, and then placing his hand on the ground. Sol Jihu repeated the same set of actions dozens of times while circling around the campsite. There's more than I thought. Can you remember them all? Why yes, I can, but… Un Yuri stared at Sol Jihu curiously. She had kept quiet so that she wouldn't unintentionally bother Sol Jihu, but she couldn't figure out why he was stopping at these places. Alright, here's the thing.
Sol Jihu lowered his voice and spoke. After listening to his explanation, Un Yuri became even more puzzled. So, that's the signal?
Yes. Me raising this spear.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled and tapped the spear of purity. Think of it as a cue. You know, kind of like how a movie director gives a signal before filming.
Yuri rolled her eyes. She understood what he was asking from her. She just didn't understand why. And so, just as she was about to ask him, "What are you doing, Tilda?"
an uninvited guest barged in. It was Yoshino Solara's older sister.
"Miss Hoshino Urara, what happened to being on the lookout?"
"I did it and then came here."
"It got too boring." Yuri furrowed her brows.
However, Sol Ji-hoo didn't get angry.
He had brought Hoshino Urara on this trip, specifically calculating that she'd act this way.
If he wanted someone who would do their given duty faithfully, he would have brought either Marcel Gionia or Kazuki instead.
"Anyways, I've been watching ya for a while,
and it sure looks like you're doing something interesting."
You were burying things in the ground. And also, Hoshino Urara stepped closer to Sol Ji-hoo. This.
What happened to it? What happened to what?
You know, the pendant that you always wear around your necklace.
Why isn't it with you today, Tilda?
So suspicious, Tilda. I can smell the fun from a mile away, Tilda. Hoshino Urara closed her eyes and sniffed.
Sol Ji-hoo grinned. As expected of a unique rancor archer, her attention to detail was impeccable.
Hoshino Urara opened her eyes and then smiled. "Now tell me. I want to know."
It was then.
The man and woman turned their gazes simultaneously. Sol Ji-hoo to the left, Hoshino Urara to the right.
Soon, a scream rang out.
It was from the direction where Seo Yuhui and Chohong had set up camp. "Aya!" Hoshino Urara exclaimed quietly. "Those two must be heated up."
In the next moment, as Hoshino Urara lowered her center of gravity to catapult herself out, Sol Ji-hoo reached out and grabbed her shoulder.
"Miss Urara."
"Ang! Promise me something before you go."
"Look at me."
Hoshino Urara slowly turned to the side.
"From now on, listen to me carefully.
If you do, I'll show you something fun and exciting."
"I'm sure you'll enjoy it." "I get what you're saying." Hoshino Urara raised her eyebrows slightly.
"But didn't you hear that scream?"
"I did."
"That's what I'm saying. I'll let you have some nice fun."
Hoshino Urara's widened eyes slowly returned to normal.
"Really?"
"Of course. Oh ho. I knew I could trust my dog's nose."
"Well, if you say so."
Hoshino Urara slowly stood up. Yuri stared at Sol Ji-hoo with a look of fluster. The scream just now was most definitely from Seo Yuhui. Sol Ji-hoo's group was far away from the campsite.
There was a chance that they might be late even if they ran there.
So why? Now, then. At that moment, Yuri's eyes lit up.
"Let's go. Make sure to put on your most shocked, hurried face." Because Sol Ji-hoo had just raised his spear.
He had given the awaited cue.
1. Again, Un means silver, and Yuri means glass in Korean.
On a dark, drizzling night, in an open space of an empty mountain range where it would not be surprising for the parasites to appear, Sol Ji-hoo and his two comrades heard Seo Yuhui's scream. Though they rushed back to their campsite, they could only make dumbfounded faces upon arrival. The situation had already winded down. Seo Yuhui was subdued,
and Chohong was grunting with her hand pressed down on her side.
No one blamed Chohong. There were at least a few dozen people in view.
Including the people hiding and in blind spots, the number of assailants could easily surpass 100. Each of them was covering their face with a mask and their body with a cape, and they surrounded the campsite as soon as Sol Ji-hoo and the two girls showed up. Based on their agile movements, they seemed to have been trained for situations like this.
Moreover, the 5 people surrounding Seo Yuhui gave off powerful auras.
Sol Jihu quickly scanned them with the 9 eyes, revealing them all to be level 6s.
He smacked his lips and swallowed his saliva. Strange. I didn't feel anyone following us.
Hoshino Urara murmured as she spun a dagger with her finger. If they didn't follow us, that must mean they were here already. After seeing the 3 of us leave, they pounced. So this whole thing was a trap?
I heard you were just a crazy bitch. A husky voice rang out.
Turns out you know your stuff.
One of the people holding Seo Yuhui captive walked forward. Though covered with a loose robe, one could tell this person was a woman from her voice.
Now, what should we do? The mysterious woman scanned Sol Jihu's group of 3.
Damn it.
You better stay still.
As Cho Hong clutched the thorn of steel, the woman sneered.
You guys will be dying here without a doubt, but we're considering giving you all a nice ending. If you move so suddenly, we can't promise what's going to happen to her.
The woman pointed back by turning her chin.
A man boasting a large build raised his arm, dragging Seo Yuhui up by her neck. Hiu tilde. As Seo Yuhui flailed her legs in the air, the burly man drew his face near her and took in a deep breath. Ah! This woman's scent.
I can't resist it. What a bewitching fragrance.
Hiu tilde.
Seo Yuhui trembled while scratching the cauldron-sized hand that was clutching onto her neck. When she glared at the burly man revoltingly like looking at a disgusting bug, the burly man snorted violently as if it excited him even more. Ki.
The flower of paradise that even Sung Shihyun couldn't pluck is in my hands.
Oi! Can't you get this over with? I don't know if I can hold out any longer. Shut it. I'm the one who decides. The woman retorted sharply.
The burly man smacked his lips regretfully and obediently fixed his posture.
How does it feel, representative of Valhalla?
Until now, Sol Jihu stood in a daze, frozen stiff.
How?
How? Don't you get what's happening?
She seemed to be mocking him. Sol Jihu quickly took a look around.
Then, he gritted his teeth and muttered with a trembling voice.
Fine.
But I haven't said anything.
We'll give it to you.
Gorad Boga is what you want, right?
We'll hand it over, so let go of Yuhui Nuna. Hurry. We'll leave right away.
Silence descended on the campsite.
Geez, do you really not get it? The woman muttered dumbfoundedly. You must have heard the archer next to you.
Are you trying to deny reality?
Well, this must be the first failure for the hero who's always walked a regal road.
With death staring down at you, I guess you must be quite shocked.
Snickers rang out from their surroundings.
What do you mean?
Isn't Gorad Boga what you want?
Isn't that why you're here? To steal it from us?
Sol Jihu shouted again. The woman sighed before looking back at Seo Yuhui.
Do you think this place is Gorad Boga? Quote. Seo Yuhui didn't answer.
She only glared at the woman while taking deep breaths. This isn't Gorad Boga. The woman said firmly.
Sol Jihu furrowed his brows. It's not? I'll tell you since you're too pitiful.
Did you really think a place like Gorad Boga exists? What? The bishop said he confirmed it personally.
Can you be any more stupid?
And here I was thinking you'd at least have a brain. The woman clicked her tongue.
Your archer was right.
We've been waiting here in ambush for several days now. In other words, we knew you would be coming here.
How's that? Are you now starting to understand what's going on? Sol Jihu blinked.
He then made a shocked face, dropping his jaw. Don't tell me. Finally.
That's right. You've been running circles on the bishop's palm this whole time.
Sol.
What do you mean? Didn't you say you found out about Gorad Boga?
Cho Hong asked with a frown.
Sol Jihu didn't reply. His lips trembled intensely as he shook his head in denial.
But he even gave me his holy artifact. We can simply retrieve it. The woman walked over to Seo Yuhui and then pulled the ring out of her finger.
Sol Jihu yelled. "What are you doing?"
Without it.
Sol Jihu bit his lower lip in the middle.
Well, we put in a lot of effort too. The woman shrugged. We buried offerings everywhere so that you'd think this place is Gorad Boga. Sol Jihu widened his mouth. He looked like he was struck speechless. He dropped his head in the next moment and muttered.
Why? Why are you doing this?
Aren't you guys Earthlings too?
We're on the same side.
So why? That's what you think. Who told you to piss off the wrong people? The woman rejected Sol Jihu's notion. You're the one who brought this upon yourself.
Haven't you thought that the parasites might attack humanity instead of the Federation because of you?
Bullshit. I understand how you feel. I'm sure you feel wrong given how hard you have worked.
But we're not here to debate who's right and who's wrong.
The woman continued. I didn't mean to talk for this long.
Why don't we start wrapping this up? Are you going to fight?
Or are you going to die gracefully? Sol Jihu gripped the spear of purity with a scowl. I'll obediently.
Die?
Oh please, like we're supposed to believe that. I'm sure you want to take at least one of us down with you. The woman cut him off.
But why don't you take a moment to think? What?
2 level 6 warriors, 1 level 7 archer, and 1 level 4 magician. An average level of 5.75. We get it. You guys are strong.
If we both went all out, I'm sure we'd have to shoulder a great loss. But if you think about it, the fact that I'm saying this must mean that we looked into your battle prowess and made ample preparations to win, right?
The woman crossed her arms leisurely. I'm being honest with you since it's all over.
Several organizations sent their most prized elites to dispatch you, so we've got quite a crowd here. As the leader in charge of this mission, I want to bring as many of them back alive as I can.
Of course, if you're really unwilling, we're happy to fight. But considering what's going to happen afterward, I can't promise you anything. The woman emphasized the last part.
You can't promise anything. Like this, for example.
The woman gave a signal, and the burly man eagerly grabbed the hem of Seo Yuhui's clothes and pulled it down. Quack!
The huge part of the gown and the priest's robe that Seo Yuhui wore as an outer garment rolled down.
Sol Jihu's eyes shot open. Stop.
However, the priest's robe became tattered in an instant and narrowly revealed Seo Yuhui's bare skin.
Ooh yeah! The burly man exclaimed. Ow! Look at this bitch's tits. These cow tits.
Seo Yuhui twisted her body left and right in an attempt to hide the faintly visible skin, but it was futile.
Those who saw her milky white skin cheered.
As if to respond to the crowd's cheers, the burly man tried to pull down her underwear too.
Stop here for now. However, the woman stopped him.
You know something? The star of lust who's currently in my comrade's hands.
There are more than a few people who are enamored with her. Ooh. Fweet.
You hear that? Paradise's legend cum flower is in our hands, and everyone's dying to pluck her.
The woman snickered. If you choose to fight, my comrades here will be very angry about losing their friends. And in their fit of fury, they'll try to find someone to vent their anger. Sol Jihu's expression stiffened. Your companions are all quite pretty too.
She glanced at Un Yuri, Chung Chohong, and Hoshino Urara before continuing. You don't want to see that either, right?
The woman you love and your precious comrades being passed around like whores from man to man, panting endlessly. Do you really want to see them suffer through all kinds of humiliation before ultimately being killed? The woman flaunted her tongue while purposely speaking in a vulgar manner. I personally don't. I can't think of a more humiliating way to die than being gang-raped to death. That's why I'm giving you a choice. She then pointed at Sol Jihu.
Just die peacefully. Then as a show of thanks, we'll kill the rest swiftly and cleanly before they can feel any pain.
I promise. If you don't believe us, we can kill your woman and your comrades first.
That much, I can do. Of course, you'd have to cut off your arms so that you can't retaliate once they're all dead.
Soul!
Don't listen to her.
Cho-hong shouted, unable to bear listening to the woman any longer. Just fight.
These bastards are nothing compared to the parasite's army commanders. Oh!
How shameless. It's not like you beat them solely with your own strength. The woman sneered.
Whatever, do what you want.
I'm confident.
Anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
If you agree, throw down your weapon. Cho-hong gritted her teeth. Hoshino Urara looked indifferent while Un-yuri dropped her head. Just what is Oppa thinking?
Beads of sweat dropped from Un-yuri's forehead. Though it was partially because she was nervous, it was mainly because she was focused on doing what Sol Jihu asked her to do. The woman stood leisurely as she watched Sol Jihu's face contorting with rage. She didn't urge him on purpose. If Sol Jihu agreed to her deal, she would be able to kill him with ease, which would undoubtedly be the best possible outcome.
Even if he didn't agree, it didn't matter. The reason she took her sweet time and even gave him time to think was all a part of her backup plan. Because talk.
It was then. After a few minutes had gone by, Sol Jihu dropped the spear of purity. The surrounding assailants stirred as if they didn't expect him to comply. The woman was also surprised, but she calmed down and spoke. Throw it over to us.
Ah! Don't.
I'll be fine. Cho-hong shouted at the top of her lungs.
She looked to be in disbelief. However, Sol Jihu kicked the spear forward. The woman snatched the spear out of the air and smiled in satisfaction. She didn't think things would go so smoothly, but it seemed the bishop was right when he said the two of them were head over heels for each other. Now this is unexpected. One of the four men behind her murmured. It was the voice of a young man. With your reputation, I wanted to try fighting you. I'm disappointed, Representative Sol.
What do you mean? I can see that he's smart.
The woman spoke quickly.
They're all going to revive on Earth anyway. If they make another intense, unforgettable memory, it's only going to be harder on Earth.
It's much better to die a clean death. I think he's being realistic. Speaking excitedly, the woman took a look around.
Now then, can you ask your friends to disarm themselves?
Sol Jihu let loose a deep sigh. Sorry, it's all because of me. Are you crazy?
Cho-hong screamed.
Her eyes were glistening with tears.
Sol Jihu muttered helplessly with his eyes on the ground.
Drop your weapons. You ah! Cho-hong howled like a beast. She smashed the ground with the thorn of steel multiple times before throwing it to the side violently.
Hoshino Urara shrugged and chucked the two daggers in her hands. Un-yuri was still unmoving.
The woman nodded. The situation seemed to be wrapping up. Good, very good. Clang! She pulled out a katana.
Oi, are you really going to kill them?
Can't you? Shut it. A promise is a promise.
The burly man, who was holding onto Seo Yuhui, spoke regrettably, but the woman was firm.
Thanks. It's my turn to keep the promise.
So who should I kill first? Your girlfriend? Sol Jihu took a deep breath.
He stood still for a long time and then.
Let me ask you something.
Before I die.
He asked with a voice tinged with despair.
Sure. As long as you're not going to waste time asking why we're doing this. The woman nodded her head. Harem.
Sol Jihu quietly said.
Attacking Yuhui Nuna and Harem. Trying to besmirch my name. Were you guys responsible for those things as well? Ah. That? Did the bishop order you guys to do that too? The woman sniggered quietly before lifting her chin up.
You just figured it out?
Well, our bishop is pretty scrupulous in how he does things.
So it's true.
Sol Jihu clenched his fists. He raised his head, but just as he was about to say something, he widened his eyes. You guys.
Ha!
Ah, really?
He spoke while staring into the air, or more precisely, at Seo Yuhui.
Ah. Sorry. I must have gotten too absorbed in my role. No, don't kill them.
This is a good opportunity, but I still have use for those 5.
What was certain was that he wasn't talking to the woman. Just as the woman started to believe that he went insane from shock. Yes, you can come here now. Looks like we already got most of the important information out of her.
What? The woman asked back in doubt. And then a loud scream burst out. A-A-A-A-A-A-C-K. The burly man writhed in pain while clutching his hand.
Seo Yuhui, whom he inadvertently dropped, was floating in the air.
Quote, exclamation mark, quote.
Even in the pitch-black darkness of the night, the woman could see clearly. A cloud of black smoke was flying towards Sol Jihu while coiled around Seo Yuhui.
What the hell?
She couldn't help but be shocked. She was never told anything about such an ability or artifact.
Sorry, I know I was supposed to wait for the signal, but it looked like this Uni was in too much pain.
No, it's fine. I was about to give the signal anyways.
Sol Jihu looked down.
Seo Yuhui was sitting in a curled-up position, shaking like a leaf. Her breathing was rough. She was deserving of an Oscar if she was acting, but it didn't look like she was. It seemed she received quite a big shock. Nuna. Sol Jihu immediately took off his cape and draped it around Seo Yuhui's body.
As he placed his hand on her back, he could feel her shaking subside. Soon, Seo Yuhui nodded.
She seemed to be saying that she was fine and that he should go ahead with the plan. Well said. Sol Jihu muttered in a low voice while looking up.
Well said.
The woman unknowingly frowned. Her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Rather than things taking a wrong turn, she felt like she'd been on the wrong path from the beginning. But what sign did she miss? I was wondering how I should drag the information out of you. Who knew you'd confess on your own?
You really helped me out. Though, I'm sure you were scheming something too.
Not only the woman but everyone around them was completely frozen. They seemed incapable of keeping up with the sudden turn of events. The woman suddenly had a thought. What if Sol Jihu was acting this whole time? Then why did he pretend to have fallen for their trap? Just what was his aim? What? What the hell happened? Even Chohong looked puzzled. With even someone on the same team as Sol Jihu being fooled, how could the enemy notice? 3 years in Harem, 7 years in that place. That's about 10 years. Sol Jihu murmured quietly before reaching out with his hand. At the same time, the woman almost fell forward. Wish. The spear in her hand shot out of its own accord before spinning back to Sol Jihu's hand. Have you guys heard? Sol Jihu spoke. They say that time heals everything. That time heals all sorrows. Sol Jihu cracked his neck. Turns out, it's wrong. There are things you can't forget even after 10 years go by. Rather than forgetting it, you get angrier the more you think about it and end up sharpening your sword. The woman stood straight and subconsciously stepped backward. Not once, but several times. She didn't understand what was going on, but one thing was for certain. The immature hero from a shonen manhwa had changed in an instant to an aged, veteran who seemed to have suffered through 10 years of war. No. That thing wasn't something like a hero. In this pitch-black night drizzling with light rain, the entire mountain range suddenly held its breath. The campsite became dead silent. What the hell happened? The burly man shouted in fear. It was because everyone could feel it. A never-felt-before killing intent that seized control over the area with crushing pressure. Their bodies shook from an unprecedented sense of unease. But it was far too late. By the time they grabbed hold of their senses and looked straight, a demon enshrouded by darkness was standing with a white spear in his hand. 10 years. Talk. A spark of electricity crackled from his feet. I've waited for 10 whole years. From his body and from his frightening eyes.
Just to beat the shit out of all of you.
Flares erupted everywhere. Today.
The movie had yet to end.
In fact, this was only the beginning.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled beamingly.
You all can look forward to what is to come.
It was at that moment